Hey guys. Tonight we begin with the Victorian conspiracies that sounded like fever dreams cooked up during a foggy London night. Plots involving shadow scientists, hidden societies, secret experiments, and scandals so bizarre the newspapers refused to print them. And yet, one by one, history proved the paranoia right. So before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now, get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You step into fog-soaked London, and the first thing you notice is that the fog is not behaving. It curls around your ankles as though inspecting you, then drifts upward with the smug confidence of a cat that has just discovered a new human to supervise. The lamps flicker overhead, their glow swallowed by mist thick enough to chew, and you begin to understand why the Victorians seem permanently tense. Nothing in this city appears exactly as it should, including the people who hurry past you with polite nods and widened eyes. Every one of them smiles the same strained smile, the kind that promises civility but whispers that they are desperately hoping you do not ask questions. You walk along the cobblestones, slippery with damp and history, and sense the way sound behaves differently here. Horse hooves clatter, wheels rattle, distant shouting loops through the streets, yet somehow everything feels muffled, as though the fog itself is listening. The city is alive, but too quiet beneath the noise. You catch fragments of conversation drifting between gas lamps, hurried murmurs about coded letters, strange lights near the river, and a constable who suddenly transferred to a district that does not actually exist. No one stops walking long enough to explain any of it. They just mutter, nod to themselves, and disappear into the haze. You turn down a narrow lane lined with brick walls that shine with moisture, and there a woman in a bonnet glances over her shoulder before addressing you in a conspiratorial whisper. She speaks so softly you lean closer, and the fog seems to lean in as well. She warns you about certain alleyways, the ones the city insists are safe even though the lamplighters refuse to enter them. You ask what happens there, and she only says, in a voice trembling with both fear and excitement, that the walls have ears and certain bricks have recently started answering back. Before you can react, she collects her groceries and rushes off, leaving you with the uncomfortable sense that you have wandered into someone else's secrets. The street widens near a row of storefronts glowing with warm candlelight. Behind one frosted window, a tailor stitches quietly while glancing at his door every few seconds. Behind another, a chemist arranges jars of powders that shimmer with colors nature never intended. He notices you watching and abruptly lowers the curtain, his silhouette vanishing as though swallowed by shadow. You move on, feeling the city's gaze shift with you. A coach barrels around a corner so fast you jump aside, and its driver shouts that no one should be out tonight unless they are prepared for what the fog brings. Before you can ask what that means, he snaps the reins and disappears again, the clatter of wheels fading into the gloom. You stand alone for a moment, listening to the drip of water from gutters, the rustle of unseen movement behind crates, and your own heartbeat thudding louder than it should. The air carries a metallic tang, something unfamiliar yet ancient, as if the city exhales secrets with every gust. You continue walking until you reach the Thames, a dark ribbon shimmering under faint lamplight. Barges creak, chains rattle, and the water laps against stone as though whispering. A pair of dock workers stand nearby, pretending to discuss cargo, but their eyes track something in the river. You follow their gaze and see nothing at first. Then a faint ripple cuts across the surface, moving against the current with deliberate intention. The men go silent, their faces drained of color, and you understand this is not a place where questions are appreciated. A constable approaches, adjusting his hat with practiced authority, but the moment he reaches you, his posture stiffens. He warns you to head home quickly, his voice calm but his pupils too wide. You ask whether something is wrong. He insists everything is perfectly ordinary while clutching his baton so tightly his knuckles whiten. "London is safe," he says. "Absolutely safe." And yet you notice the way he glances behind you, as though expecting someone or something to emerge from the fog. The night deepens, and the city feels heavier, its silence more deliberate. You know London is old, but tonight it feels ancient, as though centuries lie stacked beneath your feet like pages of a book you should not read. You sense eyes watching from shuttered windows and hear subtle shifts in the mist that are not wind. There is something in this city that thrives on secrecy and feeds on suspicion, something that makes every polite greeting sound like a warning wrapped in courtesy. You stand at the crossroads where 3 streets vanish into thick fog, and for the first time you understand why Victorians cling so fiercely to propriety. It is not pride or arrogance. It is a shield, a fragile armor against a world where unbelievable things happen far too often. And as you take your next step, you feel the cobblestones tremble in a way that suggests London has noticed you, and it is very interested in what you will discover next. You discover quickly that in Victorian London, propriety is less a moral principle and more a competitive sport. Everyone plays it, everyone cheats at it, and everyone pretends not to notice. But beneath all the polished manners and stiff collars lies something else, something humming just out of sight. It begins with the newspaper boys, those small, sharp-eyed creatures who dart through the streets like caffeinated sparrows, shouting headlines with the confidence of prophets. Each time one of them passes, you feel an odd prickle at the back of your neck. They look far too pleased with themselves, as though they hold secrets that could topple empires if they ever stopped sprinting long enough to explain them. You buy a paper from one of them, a boy no older than 12 who grins at you with the slyness of a man who has blackmailed a duke. The headline speaks of a mild political scandal. Nothing unusual, but the boy leans closer and whispers that the real story is on page 3. Written in a coded paragraph the editor thinks no one can decipher. You raise an eyebrow, and he winks before vanishing into the fog with 3 more papers and a confidence that suggests he runs half the intelligence networks in the city. You check page 3 and find an innocuous report on a charity luncheon that feels suspiciously rhythmic, as if the sentences are tapping out a message beneath the surface. You do not understand it, but someone clearly should, and that thought settles into your mind like a pebble in a shoe. As you continue walking, it becomes clear that this city thrives on secrets the way others thrive on bread. Ladies in lace gloves exchange coded pleasantries at crosswalks, their smiles sharp as letter openers. Bankers mutter figures to one another while pretending to comment on the weather. Even cabmen seem to guide their horses with a kind of knowing grimness, as though the cobblestones themselves share gossip when the streets are empty. You overhear 2 elderly men at a tea stall argue passionately about the recent appearance of mysterious lights above Pimlico. One insists it is a reflection from the river. The other nods solemnly and says that is exactly what they want people to believe. You approach a kiosk where a man sells illustrated papers depicting inventions so elaborate they look like fever dreams produced by a stressed-out clockmaker. A diagram shows a mechanical ear meant to hear conversations through brick walls. Another depicts a device for detecting falsehoods by measuring eyebrow twitches. You ask whether these are inventions or fantasies, and the vendor answers in a monotone that they are classified research projects accidentally leaked by an overeager illustrator. Then he lowers his voice and asks whether you would like tomorrow's edition already. You decline, partly because you are certain it has not been printed yet, and partly because you suspect he is not joking. Everywhere you turn, people behave as if they are participants in a grand puzzle. At the post office, customers tap their envelopes twice before dropping them into the slot, a ritual performed with the solemnity of ancient priests. A passing constable warns someone to avoid certain coffee houses after dusk, then glances around nervously, catching sight of you before deciding you are not important enough to silence. That does not comfort you. You feel as though every polite exchange in this city is simply a thin layer covering a much stranger conversation happening just beneath it. You stop outside a bookshop where 2 women argue with great decorum about a popular detective novel. Their disagreement seems harmless until one of them says she knows the author did not invent the plot. He merely disguised an incident that occurred last winter under the guise of fiction. The other woman gasps and swears she has heard the same, Then both nod with a sense of victory that implies half of London reads novels, not for entertainment, but for evidence. As you walk away, a newspaper boy rushes past again, shouting a new headline with dramatic urgency. You glance at your own paper, which was printed only minutes ago, and realize London's news moves faster than ink can dry. The boy pauses long enough to point at your edition and whisper, "That one is already outdated. Page 3 has changed." When you ask how that is possible, he grins, as though the question is adorable, and darts off before you can stop him. You stand in the middle of a bustling street, surrounded by steam, chatter, and flickering lanterns, and you begin to understand something essential about this city. Politeness is merely the cover charge. Beneath the civility and lace gloves lies a labyrinth of coded messages, whispered truths, and eyes that see far more than they ever admit. And as you fold the newspaper beneath your arm, you feel a subtle shift within yourself, as though you have unwittingly stepped into a game that began long before you arrived and will continue whether or not you understand the rules. You walk into the seance parlor expecting cheap theatrics and dramatic sighing, the sort of evening entertainment Victorians adore, because pretending to converse with the dead is somehow less scandalous than talking honestly with the living. The room is velvet, draped and candlelit, with enough incense to suggest someone has attempted to cover up several emotional crises. Chairs are arranged in a tight circle, the kind that forces strangers to touch knees and immediately pretend they do not mind. You take a seat, half amused and half curious, while the medium glides into the room with an elegance that suggests she has practiced this entrance in front of many mirrors. She begins with the usual script. "The spirits are restless tonight. The veil is thin. Please keep your thoughts pure," which would be more effective if she did not wink at a gentleman who looks like he last had a pure thought several governments ago. She asks everyone to join hands, and after a brief, awkward shuffle, the circle locks together. You can feel the slight tremor of anticipation shared among the attendees. Some are excited, some nervous, some pretending to be skeptical, while clearly hoping something dramatic happens. The medium breathes deeply, her eyes fluttering half-closed, and begins humming in a tone that sounds suspiciously like someone warming up for amateur opera. You expect a hidden assistant to rattle chains or swing a lantern behind the curtains, the standard tricks of the trade. Instead, something subtler happens. The candles flicker, not with the usual draft, but with a strange precision, each flame swaying in unison, like dancers responding to a silent conductor. The medium's humming deepens, and her voice gains an undercurrent that does not sound entirely human. The gentleman beside you straightens abruptly, then whispers in your ear that he has attended many seances and has never once seen synchronized candlelight. You nod, because suddenly the air feels different, dense and cold, as if the room is inhaling. The medium's hands rise slightly, though no one releases their grip. Her fingertips glow faintly, not with the cheap phosphorescent paint some performers use, but with a soft, internal light that pulses gently. You blink hard, convinced your eyes are playing tricks, but the light remains. The circle of attendees gasps, and the woman across from you clutches her throat in astonishment. The medium continues humming, though now her voice seems to echo from more than one direction. It is impossible for her to produce such resonance, yet here it is, vibrating softly in your bones. Then the table in the center of the circle begins to move, not violently, not with the theatrical shaking of someone kicking it under the cloth, but slowly and deliberately, as if lifted by an unseen hand that prefers subtlety over spectacle. The table rises an inch, hovers, then rotates a few degrees. You lean forward, searching for wires or rods, but you find only air shimmering faintly, the way heat distorts stone on a summer afternoon. There is no logical explanation for this, and the realization spreads through the group like an electric current. The medium opens her eyes, and they are entirely white, not rolled back in faux trance, not clouded with powder, but shining with a pale radiance that makes your skin crawl. She speaks, but the voice is not hers anymore. It is older, deeper, threaded with a kind of sorrow that does not belong to the living. You cannot make out the words, but you feel the meaning pressing against your mind like a memory you have not lived. The entire room leans in, transfixed, because even the most hardened skeptic cannot deny the shift that has overtaken the air. The candles extinguish all at once. Darkness folds over the parlor like a velvet curtain, and the temperature drops sharply. You hear someone whisper a prayer. Another person muttering that this has gone far enough. But no one moves. The medium's glowing fingertips illuminate the center of the room just enough to reveal a shape forming in the air. It is vague at first, a blur of light and shadow, then gradually becomes the outline of a figure, not solid, but undeniably present. A chill crawls up your spine as you realize you are witnessing something no parlor trick could ever replicate. The figure fades as quickly as it formed, leaving only silence and the trembling breath of the medium as she collapses forward. The candles reignite on their own, bright and steady, as though nothing unusual has happened. But everyone knows better. You release the hands you have been holding and stare around the room, half expecting someone to announce that it was all an illusion. No one does. The medium lies still, pale and shaking, and even those who came to mock the performance now sit in reverent, terrified quiet. You came expecting theatrics. You leave understanding that at least one Victorian rumor deserves your full attention. You hear the rumors first in the same way you hear most Victorian secrets, whispered too loudly by people pretending not to gossip. A pair of clerks passing in the street murmur that the Home Office has been sending men to seances on official business. A butcher packing up his stall insists he saw a member of Parliament slipping into a spirit circle after dark, still wearing his ceremonial sash. Even the tea shop owner, who swears she minds her own affairs, casually mentions that certain high-born gentlemen have been asking whether ghosts accept bribes. No one laughs. They say it with the tone of people who desperately want something not to be true and are slowly realizing it is. You try to wave it off. Government officials may be eccentric, but surely not foolish enough to take orders from the dearly departed. Still, the idea lingers. Victorian politics already feels like a seance, full of invisible forces and people speaking confidently about things no one understands. It would almost make sense for them to consult ghosts. You do your best to ignore the whispers until you overhear a pair of constables arguing beside a lamppost. One hisses that he is tired of escorting dignitaries to seances and being told the sessions count as classified briefings. The other warns him to lower his voice unless he wants to be reassigned to the district where mysterious fog tends to swallow people. You keep walking, but now the question gnaws at you. The opportunity to confirm the truth arrives in the least dignified way imaginable. You are in a dusty public records office, the kind of place where paperwork goes to mummify, searching through stacks of files that smell faintly of mildew and despair. A clerk with ink-stained fingers mutters about misfiled documents and hands you a bundle tied with twine. You open it and immediately recognize names that should never appear together on anything supernatural. Ministers, advisors, a few titled gentlemen who pretend to faint at the idea of impropriety. At the top of the sheet is a neatly typed heading: Attendance Log, Spiritual Consultation Committee. Your first instinct is that this has to be an elaborate joke, maybe a disgruntled clerk's revenge. But the dates line up with real parliamentary recesses, the kind that always raise eyebrows because they last longer than anyone can justify. You scan down the list and find column entries for Seance 1, Seance 2, and special session in lower drawing room, as if spectral communication requires meticulous scheduling. The signatures are genuine, or at least convincing enough that your jaw tightens. Several well-known officials appear repeatedly, always underlining their names with a flourish, the way men do when they want credit for attending something prestigious. You wonder whether ghosts are impressed by penmanship. The clerk notices your expression and leans in with a conspiratorial whisper. He explains that the committee began as a quiet curiosity, a small group of officials who wanted to investigate unexplained phenomena for security purposes. Then, after a seance produced information too accurate to dismiss, the group expanded. The clerk adds that he is not supposed to know this, yet somehow knows everything, which seems to be the standard qualification for Victorian government employment. When you ask whether anyone questioned the sanity of consulting spirits, he says the only thing that shocks officials these days is a tax surplus. You continue reading and find notes describing the spirits allegedly contacted. One is listed as former intelligence operative, deceased, which raises several questions, including whether retirement benefits extend into the afterlife. Another entry mentions a ghost who refuses to speak unless offered warm tea. A note in the margin says this is difficult to arrange. The handwriting looks irritated. Your mind churns as you imagine these polished statesmen sitting in velvet chairs, hands linked, waiting for a chandelier to flicker before taking policy advice from something transparent and moody. You picture ministers debating fiscal policy with a faintly illuminated Victorian grandmother who insists everyone is spending too much on railways. It should be ridiculous, but somehow the seriousness of the logs makes it worse. They believe it. Or at least, they believe it enough to show up consistently. Then you see the final page. It contains a stamped notice declaring these records confidential and threatening disciplinary action for unauthorized viewing. The stamp is crooked, the ink uneven, and the notice arrives 3 pages too late to be useful. You calm your breathing and tie the documents back together, unsure whether the room feels colder or if you simply understand London a little better now. You leave the records office with the knowledge that the whispers were correct. The government really does attend ghost sessions, not for entertainment, but for guidance. In a city where fog behaves strangely and mediums channel things no one can explain, the most powerful men in the empire have decided to consult the dead, and for the first time tonight, that decision does not seem entirely unreasonable. You descend into the railway tunnels with the confidence of someone who has not yet learned that confidence is rarely justified underground. The station above is bustling, full of commuters politely pretending they are not late. But the moment you take the narrow staircase down to the maintenance level, the air changes. It grows colder, heavier, carrying a metallic tang that reminds you faintly of old keys and something far less harmless. The gas lamps flicker with an uneven pulse, as though hesitant to illuminate what lies below. You follow a narrow walkway, listening to the echoes of dripping water and the distant rumble of a train that sounds more like a growl than machinery. You came because of rumors that railway workers whispered during tea breaks, the kind spoken only after checking that no supervisor lingers nearby. They say this line was never meant for passengers at all, that the tunnels were widened in places to accommodate experiments no one is supposed to know about. Some insist they have heard strange humming behind sealed doors. Others swear they have seen lights moving through the dark without lamps or operators. You had dismissed most of it as the sort of folklore people invent when their jobs involve too much darkness and too little sunlight. Still, curiosity carries you deeper. You reach a section of tunnel that feels different from the rest. The walls are lined with smooth stone instead of rough brick, and the tracks hum beneath your boots, even though no train is scheduled for this hour. A maintenance worker appears from the gloom, his face illuminated by a small lantern. He eyes you with suspicion, the way people look at someone who has shown up to a secret meeting without receiving the invitation. He mutters something about unauthorized access, but when you mention the rumors, he stiffens. His expression shifts from annoyance to resignation, as if he has long expected someone foolish enough to ask questions. He tells you that parts of the railway were constructed with additional tunnels that never appear on official maps, built under orders that came from offices so high no one dares speak their names aloud. Workers were told not to ask questions, only to install reinforced doors, run electrical conduits to peculiar machines, and occasionally haul in crates labeled with scientific terms that sound impressively vague. The worker points down the tunnel and insists that if you continue any farther, you do so at your own risk. Then he retreats into the shadows, his lantern dimming until it looks like a wandering star swallowed by night. You press onward. The air grows colder still, your breath forming pale clouds. The rails ahead tremble slightly, not with the rhythm of an approaching train, but a slower, deeper vibration. You step off the track bed and feel the shudder resonate through the ground like a giant creature shifting in its sleep. The lamps flicker, though there is no draft. That shiver of unease along your spine is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. When you reach the sealed door, you find it thicker than any railway installation should be, reinforced with riveted steel plates and bolts big enough to anchor a ship. You lean closer and hear something behind it, a faint mechanical whir mixed with a sound that almost resembles breathing. You jerk back, telling yourself it is only the machinery, but the breathing continues a moment longer, as though whatever is on the other side is aware of your presence. You step away carefully, debating whether the rumors were created to warn people off for a very good reason. Then you see it. Down the stretch of tunnel, past a bend swallowed by shadow. A light emerges. It is not a lantern, not a train headlamp, not any kind of light you recognize. It glides along the track with smooth, organic movement, far too low to be a carriage and far too fast to be a person. You hide against the wall, heart hammering, and watch it drift closer. The glow pulses with a blue-green shimmer, like moonlight trapped inside glass. The light slows, as if searching, scanning the darkness for something. You hold your breath, certain it should not find you. After several agonizing seconds, it moves on, sliding down the tracks before disappearing into the deep curve of the tunnel. You release your breath in a shaking exhale. Whatever that thing is, it is not listed on any railway timetable. You retreat slowly, careful not to disturb the silence. You understand now that the rumors are not exaggerated. There is something else moving underground, something the officials have chosen not to explain. As you ascend back toward the surface, the distant rumble of an ordinary train echoes through the tunnels, sounding almost comforting compared to what you have just witnessed. Almost. You first hear about the clandestine society while pretending not to eavesdrop, which is difficult because Victorians conduct private conversations at a volume normally reserved for street vendors. 2 telegraph clerks stand near a post office window, sipping weak tea and whisper, arguing about whether the copper line circle still exists. One insists the group disbanded years ago after a scandal involving misrouted telegrams and an unfortunate parliamentarian who learned of his own resignation through a message someone else forged. The other swears the circle is very much alive, pulling invisible strings through the wires stretched across the empire. You linger, studying a pamphlet with exaggerated interest, while their conversation grows increasingly frantic. They describe men in tailored coats who arrive after closing hours, letting themselves into telegraph rooms using keys no one has ever seen issued. They claim these visitors tap out messages at impossible speeds, as though their fingers move before the thought even forms. When a clerk once questioned them, he was transferred to a remote post office in a town so small it allegedly has more sheep than letters. The clerks lower their voices to a trembling whisper, saying the circle does not simply control telegraph lines. They listen through them. You step outside into the crisp air, determined to consider the story nothing more than exaggerated workplace drama, but the idea refuses to leave you. Telegraphy already feels like something bordering on sorcery, with words traveling across impossible distances through wires thinner than knitting needles. If someone wanted to manipulate those messages, the entire world could be nudged quietly from behind a desk. The thought unsettles you more than you admit. Still, curiosity wins. You make your way to the central telegraph office at dusk, choosing a vantage point beside a row of crates where you can peer through a window without looking like someone who peers through windows. Inside, clerks pack away ink pots and coil wires, moving with the weary resignation of men who trust technology slightly less than the horses they ride to work. Lamps glow softly, casting long shadows across the room. As the last clerk exits, the door clicks shut, and for a moment nothing happens. Then a faint vibration hums through the wires overhead, a shiver so delicate you almost miss it. The lamps flicker. A sound rises. Not quite Morse, not quite any rhythm you recognize, but something layered and strange, as though several messages have collapsed into one another. You lean closer, heart thudding, trying to make sense of the pattern. The telegraph machine in the center of the room springs to life. No operator sits beside it. No hands move the key. Yet the arm begins tapping rapidly, its movements sharp and purposeful. You watch the paper spool twitch as dots and dashes imprint themselves across the strip. The speed is breathtaking, far beyond any human capability, a blur of mechanical precision that seems to defy the machine's own limitations. It is not sending a message, it is receiving one. The tapping grows faster, then faster still, until it sounds like rain pounding against glass. You glance up at the wires feeding into the machine and notice a faint glow running along them. The glow travels like a pulse, zipping through the lines with a fluid, serpentine motion. The clerks were right. Something moves through the network, something intelligent enough to choose its path. You strain to read the message forming on the paper, but the dots cluster into patterns too dense to decode. It is either an extremely advanced cipher or someone has invented a new language and forgotten to tell the public. A sudden jolt shakes the machine, not violent but firm, as though whatever communicates through the wires has reached the end of its patience. The tapping slows, fades, and finally stops. The glow in the wires extinguishes, leaving only stillness. You wait in the silence, expecting someone to appear and collect the strip, but no one comes. You creep closer to the window and catch a glimpse of the final line of the transmission. The letters are uneven, almost hurried, yet unmistakably clear. Someone knows you are watching. The message ends there, its final dot pressed with unsettling deliberation. A cold wave sweeps over you as you back away from the glass. You glance at the wires stretching above the rooftops, realizing they no longer look like simple tools of communication. They resemble veins, carrying thoughts you were never meant to witness. You walk into the night with quickened steps, trying not to imagine a network of unseen eyes moving silently along the lines, observing anyone foolish enough to listen, and you cannot shake the feeling that the message you saw was not the first warning, only the first one addressed to you. You begin your investigation with the firm belief that Victorian scientists might be many things, but surely they are not sneaking around graveyards with shovels and questionable ethics. Then again, you have already seen seances attended by government officials and telegraph lines that behave like anxious serpents, so your standards for normal have begun to crumble. Still, grave robbing feels almost quaint compared to everything else lurking beneath London's decorum. You imagine a few desperate medical students with lanterns and too much enthusiasm for anatomy, little more than a historical footnote. That comforting illusion lasts exactly 5 minutes. Your search leads you to a medical college that smells faintly of formaldehyde and ambition. The corridors echo with hurried footsteps, and the students wear expressions that suggest they have not slept properly since the last monarch. A professor with spectacles large enough to double as magnifying shields intercepts you, insisting that any rumors of stolen cadavers are gross exaggerations. He assures you their supply of anatomical specimens is entirely legal. Then he drops his voice and mutters that legality is a flexible term when one is advancing science. His laugh is brittle, the sort that implies he hopes you stop asking questions and knows you will not. You make your way to the basement laboratory, where steel tables line the room and jars filled with mysterious tissues form an unsettling audience. The air hums with something more than the buzz of gas lamps. You peer at a curtained alcove where 2 students confer in frantic whispers. They flinch when you approach, hastily covering a notebook scribbled with diagrams of a human arm connected to something that is decidedly not human. You ask whether they are studying cadavers acquired through questionable means. They exchange glances, then simultaneously deny everything with the enthusiasm of men who have very much done something worth denying. A strange sound interrupts the conversation. It is faint at first, a slow scraping, then a rhythmic tapping, as though someone inside the walls is politely asking to be let out. The students go pale and insist you leave immediately. Instead, you walk toward the sound, your curiosity outweighing your caution by a dangerous margin. You find a heavy door reinforced with metal brackets, the kind used to secure things that should not roam freely. A faint glow seeps from beneath it. You call out, asking if someone is inside. The tapping stops. Then it starts again, this time with unmistakable intention, as if responding to your voice. You look back at the students, who shake their heads with frantic urgency. One confesses that no cadavers have been stolen recently, and that is because they no longer need to steal them. Their experiments have progressed beyond simple anatomy. They are trying to understand what animates life itself. They insist they are nowhere near reanimation, but their tone suggests otherwise. You gesture toward the tapping door, and both students wince, as though you have pointed out a mess they hoped to pretend was a decorative feature. When you open the door, you expect horror. You expect a grotesque, half-finished creation, or a shambling corpse with more enthusiasm than motor skills. What you find is stranger. A body lies on the table, motionless except for its hand, which taps lightly against the metal surface. Not randomly, but in a pattern remarkably similar to the coded messages you have seen telegraph operators use. The skin is pale, the chest unmoving, yet the fingers tap with precise rhythm. You step closer, heart pounding, and realize the tapping aligns too neatly to be chance. It is a message. You cannot translate it, but every instinct tells you someone or something is attempting to communicate. The students whisper that they only meant to test nerve responses, but then the hand began tapping on its own long after any stimulus should have faded. They insist the body has no heartbeat, no breath, nothing resembling life. Yet the hand continues, the pattern looping and evolving, as though gaining confidence with each repetition. You call to it softly, unsure why, and the tapping pauses. The silence hangs heavy. Then the hand lifts slightly and taps again, this time faster, with unmistakable urgency. The students panic, insisting that the experiment is beyond their control. They scramble to restrain the arm with straps, but the hand keeps tapping even as they tighten the bindings. The sound grows louder, echoing through the room, and you feel a chill run through you as you realize the message may not be meant for you at all. It may be answering something, or someone. You step back as the professors rush in, barking orders and throwing tarps over equipment. They urge you to leave and forget what you have seen, insisting the work is preliminary, harmless, and completely misunderstood. But you know better. This is no simple case of grave robbing. This is communication from a place where life should not exist, a message from the quiet edge between breath and stillness. And as you walk up the steps into the cool night air, you swear you can still hear faint tapping beneath the stone floor, carrying on the conversation without you. You arrive at the medical college expecting a place of scholarly calm, perhaps the faint smell of ink and ambition drifting politely through well-lit corridors. Instead, you step into a building that feels like it is holding its breath. Students hurry past you with stacks of books clutched to their chests, eyes darting toward shadowed doorways, as if afraid those shadows might answer back. The hallways echo with footsteps that never seem to belong to the people in sight, and more than once you catch the unsettling sensation that something is moving just behind you, only to turn and find nothing but empty air and a flickering lantern. You pretend you are here for a harmless tour, the kind offered to patrons who donate to the advancement of medical education. A professor with a too-wide smile greets you, his hair disheveled in a way that suggests either genius or chaos, and you are not yet sure which. He speaks rapidly, ushering you down a corridor lined with anatomical illustrations that appear far more detailed than any student should require. When you pause to look, he gently steers you away, insisting that the diagrams are experimental drafts and not suitable for casual viewing. His voice strains on the word experimental, stretching it into several uncomfortable syllables. As he leads you deeper into the building, the whispers you heard earlier resurface. Theories about illicit anatomy experiments, students claiming bodies exhibit responses they should not exhibit, and one rumor so unhinged that even the most sensationalist newspapers refuse to print it. The professor laughs off the rumors with an airy wave, but the way he grips the stair rail suggests the laughter is rehearsed. He escorts you toward the laboratory wing with forced enthusiasm, describing curriculum changes, research grants, and anything else unrelated to why you are truly here. The laboratory smells strongly of antiseptic, metal, and something faintly sweet that does not belong in a medical setting. Students gather around tables, muttering in urgent tones. When they see you enter, they fall into suspicious silence. You can feel their eyes trailing you as you pass by rows of cabinets filled with specimens floating in jars, many of which look as though they have been arranged to observe rather than simply to store. One jar appears to contain a heart that pulses gently, though no tubing or apparatus supports it. You blink, look again, and find it still. The professor ushers you toward a demonstration table where a sheet covers something long and narrow. He places his hands on the cloth with a flourish, but before he can lift it, a nearby student winces audibly and whispers that it is not ready. The professor shoots him a glare sharp enough to slice paper. You cannot help noticing the way the cloth twitches ever so slightly, as though whatever lies beneath is not entirely committed to staying still. You ask what is under it. The professor replies with a description so thoroughly vague it borders on poetry. You do not find that reassuring. A tray of surgical instruments gleams nearby, but their shapes do not match standard medical tools. Some resemble tuning forks, others resemble elongated needles that curve in unnatural ways. A cluster of devices sits on a neighboring table, all connected by thin copper wires that hum faintly when you draw near. A student hurriedly switches one off, pretending it had malfunctioned. You suspect it was functioning exactly as intended. The whispers around the room grow louder the longer you remain. You overhear fragments of anxious conversation. Someone mentions nerve activity persisting far longer than theory predicts. Someone else mutters that a cadaver opened its eyes during examination and followed movement across the room. A third voice insists none of this should be possible and blames the entire situation on the new research director, who reportedly wants to understand consciousness by dismantling it. Your attention drifts to a side chamber where the door hangs slightly ajar. A soft glow pulses from inside, unlike any lamp you know. Against your better judgment, you step toward it and peer through the gap. A figure lies on a table surrounded by machines that crackle with energy. It is not moving, not breathing, not alive by any conventional definition, yet you feel watched. The glow intensifies for a moment, illuminating the figure's face, and you swear its eyelids tremble as though on the brink of waking. You start to pull back quietly, but the professor appears behind you with uncanny speed. His voice remains polite, yet the sharpness in his tone makes it clear that room is not part of the official tour. He closes the door firmly, blocking out the unsettling light, and escorts you toward the exit with a sudden eagerness that borders on panic. The students watch with wary expressions, as if hoping you understand the unspoken warning in their eyes. When you step outside into the evening air, the college looms behind you in stern silence. The building looks ordinary again, but the whispers and the glow and the twitch beneath the cloth linger in your mind. What you witnessed was not grave robbing, not even questionable research. It was something far more intricate, a study of boundaries no one should be studying. And the worst part is the sensation that whatever lies in those laboratories is still aware of you, even now, as you walk away. You step into the countryside expecting fresh air, rolling fields, and maybe a sheep or two that look as though their greatest ambition is to chew grass with enthusiasm. Instead, you find something else entirely. The animals here seem alert in a way that feels wrong, as if the whole landscape is holding a secret meeting and you have interrupted. Birds stare at you from fence posts with a level of appraisal usually reserved for landlords. A stray dog watches you cross a lane, then trots ahead to guide your path like a creature who knows exactly where you ought to be going. Even the cows turn their heads in unison when you pass, blinking slowly as if evaluating your competence as a species. You were told the stories were nonsense. Rural gossip, farmers with too much time and too little daylight, tales embellished by the fog that creeps through these hills like a suspicious relative. But once you hear of crows that solve puzzles meant for university students, chickens that refuse to enter certain barns on certain nights, and foxes working in coordinated patterns too intricate to be chance, curiosity pulls you forward. You follow the trail of whispers until you reach a row of secluded structures, tucked behind hedges so dense they look grown for secrecy rather than shelter. The buildings are not barns, though they pretend at rustic charm with their slanted roofs and peeling paint. You can feel the low vibration beneath your feet the moment you cross the threshold onto the grounds, a faint hum threading through the soil as though something far below is awake and waiting. The front door of the nearest structure opens with a complaining creak, the kind that suggests the hinges have seen too much and would prefer retirement. Inside, the air smells faintly of straw, ink, and an unsettling sweetness. You see cages, but not the cruel sort. These are lined with small beds, toys, and puzzles made from gears and levers. A cluster of mice gather around a wooden contraption, working together to slide pieces in what appears to be a coordinated sequence. When one of them spots you, it squeaks sharply, and the others stop, turn, and assess you with identical expressions. Identical. That alone sends a chill through your spine. You step farther into the room. Charts line the walls, each one mapping patterns of learning curves you do not want to believe belong to animals. Some graphs rise too quickly. Others plateau at levels you cannot imagine any creature reaching without a rather expensive education. A small chalkboard nearby contains notes written in haste. You lean in, hoping to understand a fragment, but the vocabulary bends toward theories that should not exist yet. Something about induced adaptation and cognitive catalysts. Something else about genetic echoes responding faster than anticipated. A low huff draws your attention to the far corner where a pig, round as a teapot and twice as observant, watches you with profound interest. It shifts its weight, snorts softly, and glances toward a door behind it. The gesture feels intentional, an invitation, or perhaps a warning. Against your better judgment, you push open the door and find a stairwell leading down into the dim. The deeper you walk, the stronger the hum becomes, wrapping itself around you like static. It vibrates through the railing, buzzes along the stone, and pulses in time with the lights overhead. The corridor at the bottom opens into a chamber that feels like an unfinished secret. Tables are arranged with jars of specimens, but the contents move in ways that imply awareness rather than preservation. One jar holds a salamander that tracks your movements with eerie calm. Another contains what appears to be a mole, only its paws are shaped in a way that suggests they were never meant for digging. In the center of the room, a cluster of documents lies scattered around a lamp. You skim enough to understand the horror disguised as innovation. Experiments meant to unlock evolution's speed, trying to uncover how small changes ripple into leaps. The language is clinical, detached, and disturbingly proud. The researchers believed they were helping nature accelerate its plans. They did not consider that nature might accelerate in unpredictable directions. A rustle behind you makes you turn. The pig from above stands in the doorway, somehow having followed without making a sound. Its eyes reflect the lamplight with unsettling clarity, almost as if it is waiting for your verdict. You understand suddenly that the animals are not just subjects, they are participants, perhaps collaborators, perhaps aware in ways neither the researchers nor the world is prepared to acknowledge. You back away slowly, the hum around you deepening as if the chamber itself is inhaling. Every instinct urges you to leave before something in this place decides you are a variable worth studying. When you step outside and feel the cool air again, the fields seem quieter, the animals more distant, their gazes softer. Yet the knowledge sits heavy in your mind that evolution is not always a slow march. Sometimes it is a sprint taken in secret, under lamplight, guided by curious hands that never stop to ask whether the finish line is meant to be crossed. And you cannot shake the sense that the animals are still watching you, not with fear, but with something unsettlingly close to understanding. You first hear the rumors in a cramped tea shop, where the steam clouds the windows and the biscuits have the texture of lightly sugared gravel. A pair of clerks whisper at the next table about strange mists drifting through crowded districts at dawn, the kind that make people pause mid-stride, with the same confused expression you see on someone realizing they left the stove burning. The clerks insist it is nothing natural, nothing seasonal, nothing anyone should be breathing if they value having a full assortment of working organs. You pretend not to listen, which is difficult because they lean so far across their table they nearly fall into your saucer. When you step back into the street, London greets you with its habitual gray breath, but now you watch it more closely. Smoke from chimneys behaves like smoke should, swirling lazily upward. Fog gathers in the usual places, clinging to alleys the way stray cats cling to people who do not want to pet them. Yet beneath these ordinary layers, you sense something else. A thin, shimmering haze that drifts with a purpose fog should not possess. It moves as though listening. You follow it down toward a district dense, with shop fronts and people hurrying toward nowhere in particular. The haze hovers above their heads like a bored spirit deciding whom to annoy next. A woman coughs sharply, pulling a handkerchief embroidered with flowers that seem too cheerful for the situation. A man stops to rub his eyes, blinking rapidly. A child asks her mother why the air tastes funny. The mother shushes her, insisting it is just dust from the neighboring factory, even though the factory closed 2 weeks ago. You slip into a narrow side street and find 3 men wearing the kind of official coats that reek of authority and wet wool. They stand beside a metal canister, disguised poorly as a street lamp. You only notice the canister because it emits a faint hiss, followed by a shimmer in the air that looks suspiciously like the haze drifting through the district. One of the men waves a device the size of a loaf of bread, muttering to the others while tapping gauges with a pencil. You hear the words distribution, dosage, An unexpected reaction. None of these are words you want associated with anything you are inhaling. When they spot you, they straighten abruptly. One coughs into a handkerchief decorated with the crest of some official department you suspect would not appreciate your presence. Another insists you should move along. Nothing to see here. Typical maintenance. Terribly mundane. Please stop staring. He delivers this speech while blinking so rapidly it suggests his eyes are staging a minor revolt. You ask why maintenance requires a canister hissing mysterious vapors. They exchange glances, the kind that say a story must be fabricated quickly. The tallest one explains it is a new method for dispersing perfume to improve public morale. You look around at the crowd of coughing pedestrians and struggle to identify anyone whose morale has notably improved. The official coughs again, this time so violently he doubles forward, clutching his chest. His companions help him stand, reassuring you he merely swallowed a biscuit wrong. Given the state of Victorian biscuits, you briefly consider believing him. You continue down the street, pretending to lose interest, but you circle back around as soon as they leave. Once they are gone, you approach the canister. A faint residue coats its side, glistening like dew. You dab a gloved fingertip against it. The substance tingles with a strange warmth, and for a moment you swear the world sharpens at the edges. Sounds become clearer, colors brighten. Even the cobblestones seem to hum beneath your boots. It is not unpleasant, exactly, but it is not natural either. When the sensation fades, it leaves behind an emptiness like someone snuffed a lantern behind your ribs. Later that evening you attend a public meeting where city officials insist reports of mysterious vapors are exaggerated nonsense. They deliver statements with practiced calm, though every single one coughs into a handkerchief at least twice. They reassure citizens that nothing unusual is in the air, nothing toxic, nothing experimental, and certainly nothing being tested under the guise of routine street maintenance. Their speeches are well rehearsed, authoritative, and accompanied by an orchestra of poorly disguised wheezing. One official's handkerchief slips from his fingers as he gestures toward the crowd. You catch a glimpse of a dark stain on the cloth, a color not found in any ailment known to polite society. He snatches it up quickly, smiling with the desperation of a man clinging to the last plank of a sinking ship. As the meeting ends, the fog thickens outside in a way that feels almost deliberate. People hurry home, coughing softly, rubbing their eyes, muttering about the strange metallic taste lingering on their tongues. Officials march past you, denying everything to anyone who will listen, even as they break into fresh fits of coughing beneath the street lamps. You stand at the corner watching the haze drift between the buildings like a patient animal learning its roots. Whatever the officials claim, you know one thing for certain. Air should not shimmer with intention, and when it does, someone, somewhere, is lying about why. You find the inventors in a cluttered workshop tucked between a clockmaker who never smiles and a baker who insists his pastries are fresh even when they clearly emit the texture of compressed disappointment. The workshop door is marked only by a brass plaque engraved with initials that refuse to stay still when you look at them too long. Inside, gears tick, springs twitch, and coils hum with the kind of energy that suggests someone attempted to teach electricity manners, and it politely declined. The inventors greet you with distracted enthusiasm. They share the jittery air of people who have slept too little and discovered too much. One offers you tea that smells faintly of metal filings, while the other apologizes for the mess by gesturing vaguely at a room where every surface is occupied by half-assembled contraptions and blueprints layered like geological strata. They speak in overlapping sentences, finishing each other's explanations with the seamless chaos of siblings or conspirators. You suspect they are both. You came because of the rumors, whispered in pubs and printed in the more dramatic corners of the press. Devices that predict crimes before they occur. Machines that hum warnings about thefts, fires, and even murders not yet committed. At first you dismissed the stories as sensational nonsense, but then inspectors began showing up at crime scenes minutes before the crimes happened, and the coincidences stacked into something impossible. As you step deeper into the workshop, you see one of the devices perched on a wooden table, like an overeager pet. It resembles a clock that gave up on timekeeping, and instead pursued a career in prophecy. Brass plates overlap like scales, Glass tubes pulse with soft glows, and tiny hammers strike metal pins with quick, nervous taps. The sound forms no rhythm you can recognize, yet it feels deliberate, like a heartbeat belonging to something that never existed until a clever meddler built it. One inventor gestures you closer, proud and anxious at once. He explains that the machine reads fluctuations in human intention, though how it accomplishes this remains unclear even to him. He admits they did not set out to predict crimes. They were attempting to measure ambient emotional fields, a concept you did not realize had measurable qualities. When the first device began chiming moments before a nearby burglary, they assumed it was luck. When it correctly signaled a fight breaking out 2 streets away, they took notes. When it warned about a stabbing that had not yet occurred, they panicked and built more machines. The second inventor adjusts a dial, and the machine whirs, trembling slightly. You feel the hair on your arms rise in response. The workshop grows quieter, as though the air itself pauses to listen. A faint hum builds from within the contraption, soft at first, then pulsing steadily like a warning disguised as a lullaby. The inventors exchange uneasy glances. One reaches for a notebook with shaking fingers. "It is predicting something," he murmurs. "Something near." Your instinct is to leave immediately, but curiosity pulls you nearer. The dials jitter between numbers that have no labels. A bell rings once, twice, then falls silent, as though reconsidering its message. The machine emits a long, low tone that vibrates through the workshop floor. You ask what it means. The inventors look at each other again, then at you, unsure who should answer. "It means," one finally says, "that someone nearby has made a choice they should not have made." You do not find this explanation comforting. You ask what action is being predicted. They shrug helplessly. The machines do not provide details, only warnings. The inventors have tried to decipher patterns by comparing tones, measuring vibrations, calculating frequencies, and mapping each occurrence to the resulting crime. They show you pages of calculations that suggest everything from impending petty theft to full-scale catastrophe. You step back from the machine, watching its brass plates quiver with unsettling anticipation. You suddenly understand why officials want the inventors silenced. Technologies that expose intentions, even misguided ones, threaten the fragile civility of a society already teetering on paranoia. If a device can hint at wrongdoing before it occurs, then everyone becomes suspect. Everyone becomes dangerous. The hum deepens again, and the machine's hammers strike in a pattern that feels almost like speech. You cannot tell whether it is warning you or addressing you. The inventor closest to it whispers that this pattern has never occurred before. His voice trembles with awe and dread. For a moment the workshop feels colder, as though the world beyond its walls has shifted and the machine is the first to notice. The tone grows shrill, then abruptly stops, leaving silence so thick it presses against your ears. You exhale slowly. Whatever choice the machine sensed has passed, or is simply outpacing your comprehension. You turn to leave, knowing you have seen something that should not exist, something that blurs the line between invention and intrusion. Behind you, the machine hums softly once more, as if pleased with itself, and the inventors whisper heatedly about calibrations and anomalies. You step into the street with the uneasy certainty that crime is no longer merely committed. It is anticipated, observed, and perhaps one day prevented. And that knowledge feels as dangerous as any crime ever could. You learn about the club the same way one learns most uncomfortable truths in Victorian London, by listening to people who insist they are not gossiping while absolutely gossiping. A banker mutters about sudden market swings that seem suspiciously synchronized with unusually poetic weather forecasts. A shopkeeper complains that he lost half his savings after a report predicting light drizzle somehow triggered a collapse in steel shares. Someone swears that whenever the forecast mentions a wistful breeze, investors with impeccable pedigrees begin quietly buying up coal. At first it sounds ridiculous, yet every whisper contains the same detail. An aristocratic club so secret its members deny their own existence while attending weekly dinners in a mansion everyone pretends not to see. You follow the trail through Threadneedle Street, listening for the shifting tone that falls over conversation whenever weather is mentioned. People glance upward, as if the clouds have taken sides. You find a newspaper vendor who sells more financial papers than anyone else in London because he has memorized the weather section and recites it with troubling enthusiasm. When you ask him whether the forecasts actually affect the markets, he leans closer, lowers his voice, and tells you it is no coincidence that a thunderstorm was predicted 5 minutes before last month's railway stock plummeted. He claims the club uses coded phrases buried within the reports to signal which sectors the elites should quietly buy or sell. You ask who writes the codes. He says no one knows. Some think it is a rogue meteorologist with too much time and too few morals. Others whisper it is not a single person at all, but a committee of aristocrats with matching rings and matching disdain for consequences. You eventually find yourself standing outside a mansion tucked between taller buildings like a secret wedged into plain view. It has no sign, no knocker, and windows shuttered tightly despite the mild weather. You watch carriages arrive one by one, each carrying men in impeccable coats who enter through a side door without pausing. They carry umbrellas even though the sky is clear, as if prepared for a storm only they have been warned about. A footman stationed outside maintains a rigid posture, but you notice his eyes flick toward the sky every few seconds, searching for signals only he understands. You slip into an alley that offers a view of a rear window cracked open just enough to hear voices drifting out. They speak in calm tones, discussing barometric pressure and economic fallout, as though these subjects naturally belong in the same sentence. One man claims an increase in humidity should trigger a rise in maritime shipping shares, while another argues that fog in the northern districts ought to warn investors away from textiles. The precision with which they speak makes your skin prickle. These are not metaphors. They are instructions. A bell rings inside, followed by an expectant hush. A speaker recites the next day's weather report in the same cadence used for ceremonial oaths. Each phrase falls heavy and deliberate. Slight warming in the afternoon, mild winds shifting from the west, evening clouds gathering with uncertain temperament. The men hum in approval, taking notes with synchronized strokes. You watch as one murmurs that uncertain temperament means gold should be purchased immediately, while winds shifting suggests rail investments will wobble. You realize with a creeping sense of disbelief that these people are not merely interpreting weather, they are deciding it. The coded forecasts are not predictions at all, but instructions distributed across the financial world to bend the markets in their favor. They have crafted a system where atmospheric poetry becomes currency, and everyone else simply breathes the consequences. Then, as if to confirm the absurdity, a man near the window coughs and says the word tempestuous should never again be used unless they want another panic. The room chuckles politely, as though discussing an unfortunate social faux pas rather than an economic disaster that sent an entire district scrambling for explanations. You pull back into the alley, heart racing. Up above, the clouds drift lazily, unaware they are co-conspirators in a grand deception. A gentle breeze brushes your coat, and for the first time you wonder if even the wind carries hints meant for someone else. When the next day's weather report appears in the newspaper, you read it with new eyes. It speaks of a calm morning followed by a thoughtful haze and concludes with restless skies approaching from the south. The words look innocent enough, but you now understand that somewhere behind shuttered windows, aristocrats are likely preparing to buy, sell, and shift fortunes according to those phrases. And as you fold the paper, you cannot tell whether the day feels calm, thoughtful, or restless. You only know the markets certainly will. You arrive at the docks, expecting the usual chaos of cargo crates, briny air, and sailors loudly insisting they have not been drinking while smelling unmistakably like they have. But the atmosphere tonight feels taut, stretched thin over something unsaid. Lanterns sway in the wind with a jittery pulse, and the water laps against the pilings with a rhythm that sounds almost intentional, as though repeating a warning no one wants to decipher. The sailors gathered along the wharf speak in low voices, casting wary glances at the horizon where fog crouches like a beast waiting for permission to move. You approach a group of deckhands repairing nets beside a stack of barrels. They fall silent the moment you come close, their faces shuddering with practiced caution. One of them, A man whose beard looks like it has survived more battles than he has leans in and asks what business you have wandering the docks after dark. When you mention the rumors of government ships disappearing, the entire group stiffens as though a cold wave has rolled over them. They exchange glances heavy with meaning, the kind that communicate more than words ever could. The bearded man finally speaks, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. He tells you, ships are not merely disappearing, they are vanishing without sending a single distress signal, without debris washing ashore, without so much as a splinter bobbing on the current. One vessel was last seen sailing into a patch of fog so thin a child could outrun it. When the watchers blinked, the ship was gone. Another vanished under a clear sky, reported by a lighthouse keeper who swears the sea swallowed it in the time it took him to adjust his lantern. You follow the sailors down a narrow pier where mooring ropes creak softly like old bones. They point to the empty spaces between the pilings, explaining which ships once anchored there and how quickly their captains stopped speaking about government assignments. A shipwright emerges from a shed nearby, wiping grease from his hands. When he overhears your conversation, he joins in without invitation. He swears the hulls built for government contracts have begun to return to his workshop in pieces before ever touching sea. Not physical pieces. Paperwork, permissions, cryptic instructions that make no sense. As if the vessels exist only on paper now, their real forms having drifted somewhere far less comforting. A gust of wind sweeps through the dock, carrying the scent of salt and something metallic. You hear chains clattering as a crane swings idle above crates marked with government stamps. One crate sits half opened, revealing rows of brass instruments shaped like compasses, but with needles that spin continuously in tight, frantic circles. A sailor slams the lid shut when he notices you, staring, and mutters that the devices were meant to help ships navigate new trade routes. Instead, they drive anyone who uses them into a panic, insisting the sea beneath them is shifting. As you walk farther, you notice the fog creeping closer along the water's surface. It glows faintly, as though lit from beneath by something deep and restless. A group of sailors stand at the end of a pier watching it with the seriousness of men who have seen enough to mistrust beauty. One says the fog pulses with sound late at night, a low hum that vibrates through the wooden planks and wakes every dog in the district. Another swears he heard voices echoing from inside it, not calling for help but issuing commands. You step closer to the edge and feel the boards tremble under your boots, though no wave touches them. The fog inches nearer, trailing long tendrils across the surface like fingers searching for purchase. Someone behind you whispers that this is how it began for the last ship, that the fog approached slowly at first before rising like a wall and snatching the vessel from sight. No one has seen that ship or its crew since. A constable strolls past, pretending not to listen, offering a breezy assurance that the government is investigating the incidents and that everything is under control. He coughs briefly, adjusts his collar, and avoids looking toward the water. When a sailor asks him whether he has heard the hum, he responds too quickly and walks away faster than a man confident in his words should. Night settles deeper over the docks, and the fog glows brighter. But no one dares approach it. The sailors disperse slowly, leaving you standing alone with the rhythmic slap of water and the distant groan of ships that have not yet vanished. You realize the disappearances are not mysteries born of sailor superstition. Something is happening beneath the waves, something the government has noticed, feared, and failed to contain. And as the fog curls around the pilings, you feel the uneasy certainty that whatever pulls those ships under has begun to take interest in who is asking questions. You find the stargazers in Regent's Park long after the lamps have dimmed and the city has settled into its nocturnal rhythm of distant carriage wheels and half-muffled arguments about nothing. The gentlemen gather in a clearing well away from curious eyes, lugging telescopes tall enough to suggest compensation of some kind, and notebooks so densely scribbled they resemble the ramblings of prophets or very exhausted accountants. Their coats are immaculate, their shoes polished, but their expressions carry the strained alertness of men who have stared at something too long and seen something they did not wish to see. You linger at the edge of the clearing, pretending to admire the night sky. A cluster of them hunches over a brass device shaped like a cross between a sextant and a weapon someone forgot to finish inventing. They mutter coordinates with mechanical precision, numbers flowing from their mouths faster than they can write them down. One gentleman adjusts his telescope by a hair's width and inhales sharply, as though a whisper of light many miles away has personally offended him. You step closer, hoping to blend in with the enthusiasm of someone who likes stars but does not trust them. Their leader, a man with silver hair and spectacles that magnify his eyes into trembling dinner plates, waves you over. He asks whether you have noticed the pattern. You are not sure which pattern he means. He gestures toward the sky with a flourish that suggests everything in the universe is misbehaving at once. He explains that the stars have shifted, not the kind of shift sailors account for, not the slow drift astronomers politely debate, but something sharper, deliberate, as though the sky itself has been nudged when no one was looking. He shows you his meticulous charts. Lines and angles stack across the pages with a precision that would impress the telegraph inventors you met earlier. Each page maps constellations that do not quite match the ones etched in textbooks. Something is off by fractions too intentional to ignore. You ask whether these discrepancies could be simple errors. The man bristles, insisting that his last error occurred during a comet sighting 20 years ago, and he has not forgiven himself since. Another gentleman beckons you toward his telescope. You lean down to the eyepiece, expecting the familiar sprawl of stars and darkness. Instead, you notice an unusual flicker along the edge of a constellation you know by heart. It is faint, almost teasing, like a lantern signal sent from unimaginable heights. You blink, look again, and the flicker appears once more, a deliberate pulse rather than a trick of the atmosphere. The gentlemen grow animated when you mention it. They whisper about watchers, an unseen intelligence charting movements from above. They claim the flickering points have appeared at intervals too precise to be natural. They suspect someone, or something, is drawing patterns in the night, sending signals for purposes unclear and probably unpleasant. They have tried to decipher the pulses, comparing them to telegraph rhythms, Morse codes, and even musical scales, but none align perfectly. It is as though the sky is speaking in a language too old or too new to interpret. One man produces a map of London aligned with the star charts. He traces lines between locations that match the celestial pulses, revealing a geometry so intricate it suggests intention far beyond random chance. The lines intersect near government buildings, research laboratories, and one unfortunate bakery known for exploding ovens. You stare at the map, unsettled by the possibility that the watchers above are marking the city with mathematical indifference. The night deepens, and the cold becomes more insistent. The gentleman falls silent as a fresh pulse shimmers across the constellation. This time the flicker is brighter, lingering a second longer, as if acknowledging the observers below. A ripple of unease runs through the group. One whispers that the watchers know they are being watched. Another mutters that humanity has become an entry in some cosmic ledger. You step back from the telescope, suddenly aware of how small you feel beneath the vast dome of sky. The gentlemen consult their charts with frantic urgency, scribbling notations while glancing upward as though expecting an answer. The flicker fades, leaving the constellations looking perfectly ordinary again, which somehow makes the night feel even more hostile. As you leave the clearing, the gentlemen continue their feverish mapping, determined to decode whatever intelligence hovers above them. You walk through the quiet park with a new awareness of the stars. They seem too bright, too deliberate, as if arrangements have been made without your consent. You glance up one last time. The sky looks still, but you cannot shake the feeling that someone is watching, patient and calculating, waiting for the moment when their observations no longer need to be subtle. You enter the botanical gardens expecting the usual display of exotic greenery curated for polite society, the kind of place where ladies stroll with parasols and pretend not to notice bees because shrieking is unbecoming. Instead, the moment you pass through the wrought iron gates, the air thickens. It carries a perfumed sweetness tinged with something sharper, something that pricks at your senses like a whispered warning. The pathways twist beneath canopies of leaves so dense they dim the afternoon light into a green haze. Everything feels too alive, too aware, as if the plants themselves have paused their gentle rustling to watch you. You follow a gravel path past orchids that gleam with iridescent hues no natural pigment should produce. A gardener kneels nearby, trimming a vine that coils away from his shears before reluctantly allowing itself to be cut. He notices your stare and forces a reassuring smile, though his hand trembles slightly. He mentions that the gardens have acquired new specimens from remote expeditions, plants described in journals as marvels of evolution. Then he mutters that the journals left out several details. When you ask what kind, he straightens sharply and insists you enjoy the conservatories before they close. The glass house looms ahead, its panes fogged with condensation that drips steadily like sweat. As you step inside, the air grows warmer, heavy with humidity and the scent of something faintly metallic. Rows of plants stretch toward the ceiling, some tall enough to scrape the rafters, others clustered close like conspirators. A woman in a botanical apron guides visitors through the displays with the enthusiasm of someone desperate to maintain normalcy. She calls attention to a fern that grows in spirals rather than fronds, a blossom that shifts colors depending on who is looking at it, and a peculiar vine that hums softly when touched. The visitors laugh nervously, as though unsure whether any of these behaviors are recreational or predatory. You drift toward a secluded corner where a plant sits beneath a glass dome. It is small compared to the others, a simple cluster of leaves with a single bulbous growth at its center. A sign identifies it with a Latin name that means nothing to you, followed by a brief description suggesting it is extremely rare and not to be handled. The dome fogs slightly as you approach, and for reasons you cannot explain, you lean closer. The bulb at the center of the plant pulses once, faintly, like a heartbeat buried in petals. You blink, telling yourself you imagined it. Then it pulses again, stronger this time, the surface swelling and contracting with unsettling rhythm. The leaves shift subtly, rearranging themselves as though adjusting to observe you more clearly. You glance around to see whether anyone else has noticed. The nearby visitors remain focused on a carnivorous lily that snaps flies with unnerving precision, oblivious to what is happening in the corner. You crouch slightly, studying the plant. The bulb expands a third time, and a hairline crack forms along its surface. A thin filament emerges, unfurling like an inquisitive tendril. It hovers in the air, swaying gently, searching. You step back, heartbeat quickening. The filament follows your movement with unmistakable interest, bending toward you. Another emerges beside it, then a third, each wavering with delicate curiosity that feels far too coordinated to be instinct. The air shifts, the humidity warming around your ankles as if the plant is exhaling. The tendrils stretch farther, brushing the inside of the dome, tapping lightly with a soft tick-tick-tick. You realize they are testing the glass. The tapping grows firmer, more rhythmic, almost intelligent. For a moment you picture the bulb splitting open entirely, releasing something that was never meant to share space with humans. You back away quickly, bumping into a table of harmless-looking herbs. The botanist from earlier hurries over, pale-faced, sliding between you and the specimen. She whispers that some plants respond aggressively to unfamiliar stimuli. Then she lowers her voice further and admits that this particular specimen was found growing in a region where compasses fail, insects flee, and explorers travel in pairs for fear of the vegetation itself. She taps the dome with a practiced gesture, sending a vibration that causes the tendrils to retract, curling protectively around the bulb. She escorts you out of the glass house with firm politeness, assuring you that all research is perfectly safe, regulated, and entirely beneficial to science. Her tone falters on the last word. Behind you, the dome fogs once more, and you glimpse the plant pulsing in slow, deliberate rhythm. Outside, the air feels blessedly cooler, yet the memory of that tapping lingers in your bones. You walk past the perfectly trimmed hedges and ornate fountains, suddenly aware of how easily beauty disguises danger in this city. The gardens seem peaceful again, but you know now that something inside those glass walls is evolving in ways no human intended, and you cannot shake the feeling that the plant was not reacting to you. It was recognizing you. You enter the factory expecting noise, heat, and the familiar clang of metal on metal, but the atmosphere is strangely subdued. The machines churn with steady rhythm, yet the workers move with a dazed precision that feels rehearsed rather than natural. Their eyes flick toward the rafters with a quiet wariness, as if expecting something to drop from above. The air tastes faintly of oil and something colder beneath it, something metallic in a way that suggests more than machinery. You walk between rows of steam-powered presses, each exhaling plumes that twist upward like reluctant ghosts. One worker glances at you, then quickly returns to fastening bolts with hurried intensity. You approach him gently, asking whether the rumors of monitored dreams have any truth to them. He stiffens, jaw tightening. He insists he knows nothing, which is precisely what someone would say if they knew far too much. When you step away, he mutters under his breath that dreams used to be the only thing the supervisors could not touch. The past tense hangs in the air like dust caught in a sunbeam. You move deeper into the labyrinth of machinery, past conveyor belts carrying parts whose shapes are unfamiliar and slightly unnerving. A foreman appears beside you with the silent glide of someone accustomed to surprising people. He asks whether you have authorization to be on the floor. His tone is polite, yet his eyes remain fixed on your expression, studying it as though your thoughts might spill visibly onto your skin. You apologize and claim you are here to observe recent innovations. He nods once, then gestures toward a staircase leading to the administrative offices. Upstairs, the noise fades to a dull throb. The walls are lined with filing cabinets too numerous for any factory's legitimate needs. Papers lie scattered across a long table, some neatly stacked, others spread open as though abandoned mid-review. You hesitate, then sift through a few pages. Most seem ordinary at first: supply orders, shift schedules, production summaries. But beneath these, tucked between two sheets stamped with the factory's crest, you find diagrams. They are not diagrams of machines. They chart neural pathways, sketched with meticulous care, annotated with terms that should belong in a medical college, not a textile mill. Margins filled with notes discuss dream recall patterns, subconscious responsiveness, and stimuli testing. You read the words twice, then a third time, hoping they will rearrange themselves into something less disturbing. They do not. Another document describes sleep cycle observation through ambient auditory cues, which sounds harmless until you notice the section labeled compulsory compliance. You hear footsteps in the hallway and instinctively tuck the papers back into place. Two supervisors enter the room mid-conversation, whispering about last night's collection cycle. One complains that the workers have begun resisting, that too many wake abruptly during the intervals. The other responds that the directors will not tolerate inconsistencies and that adjustments must be made before the next round. You flatten yourself against a cabinet as they pass, hoping the shadows swallow your presence. They do not notice you, preoccupied by their quiet argument. When they leave, you release a slow breath and return to the documents, seeking answers you are no longer certain you want. A folder marked with a single initial catches your attention. Inside is a list of names, each paired with descriptions of recurring dreams. Some notes mention fear, some mention repetition. A few describe unfamiliar symbols that appear across multiple dreamers' reports, as though the workers share visions without understanding why. You recognize a phrase repeated throughout the files: nocturnal observation protocol. The words feel clinical, almost dull, but your skin prickles with unease. Another page contains a map of the factory floor, overlaid with unfamiliar shapes. At first it resembles ventilation routes, until you notice the shapes align with places where machines emit peculiar rhythmic sounds, tones that seem too patterned for ordinary function. You recall a worker describing how those tones follow him into sleep, echoing through his dreams. Your attention drifts to a small locked drawer built into the desk. The key sits beside it as though someone intended to return and forgot. You hesitate only briefly before unlocking it. Inside lies a slim ledger filled with handwritten entries. The ink grows darker and more frantic with each page. The writer confesses suspicion that the machines are not merely recording dreams but influencing them, nudging subconscious thoughts towards certain shapes, certain patterns, certain obedience. The final entry states simply, "They know I am aware." A cold breath of air sweeps across the room, though the windows remain shut. You close the ledger with trembling hands and place it back exactly as you found it. The hallway outside is silent now, unnervingly so. You leave the office quickly, passing through the factory floor where the workers continue their tasks with mechanical focus. Yet their eyes flick toward you, lingering a moment too long, as though unsure whether you are an observer or another part of whatever watches them. When you step outside, the city air feels sharper, cleaner, real. But the documents weigh heavily in your mind. Something inside that factory is reaching into dreams, studying thoughts meant to remain private, perhaps shaping them with quiet persistence. And as you walk away, you cannot help glancing over your shoulder, half expecting the machines to hum your name. You arrive in the northern villages after a long, rattling carriage ride through moors that seem determined to discourage visitors. The landscape stretches in muted greens and grays, punctuated only by the occasional stone wall or flock of sheep that watches you with the judgmental intensity of retired school teachers. The air feels different here, thinner at first, then strangely charged, as though the sky is full of anticipation. The villagers meet you with polite curiosity, tinged with a quiet urgency, as if they have been waiting for someone foolish enough to investigate the lights. They guide you toward the edge of the settlement, where the fields slope into a shallow valley. The houses thin out, replaced by weathered trees and patches of heather trembling in the wind. A farmer with lines etched deep into his face points toward the valley and tells you the lights appear without warning. Sometimes they hover low to the ground like lanterns carried by invisible hands. Other times they streak across the sky with the speed of a startled bird. But the detail that unsettles you most is the one every villager confirms. The lights respond when spoken to. You try not to reveal how little you believe this, though skepticism seems pointless in a place where the wind itself feels aware of your presence. As dusk settles, the villagers gather on a ridge overlooking the valley. Lanterns glow dimly at their feet, though no one dares lift one. A hush falls over the group, a silence shaped not by fear, but by familiarity, like people waiting for an old acquaintance who keeps inconvenient hours. At first, nothing happens. The valley grows darker, the sky deepening into twilight. Then a faint glimmer appears in the distance, a single pale spark hovering above the ground. It brightens gradually, pulsing through shades of silver and soft gold. Beside you, a woman nudges your arm and whispers that the lights always begin this way, as if warming up or testing the air. 3 more glimmers appear, rising slowly until they form a loose cluster that drifts across the valley. They move with uncanny precision, neither swaying like lantern flames nor darting like fireflies. They float, they wait. The villagers watch with calm reverence, leaving the speaking to you. One of them explains softly that the lights prefer new voices. You feel ridiculous addressing something that has no shape, no face, no business listening. Still, you clear your throat and call out a single word, "Hello." The nearest light brightens immediately, a flash quick as a heartbeat. The villagers murmur approval. Encouraged, you ask another question. "What are you?" The lights shift positions, forming a loose arc as though conferring. One dips low, then rises again, tracing a small circle in the air. You tell yourself it is coincidence, though coincidence loses credibility after several repetitions. You ask if it understands you. All 4 lights pulse at once. The reaction sends a shiver through you. You search for tricksters, hidden lantern bearers, anything logical, but the valley remains empty. The lights glide upward, spiraling like dancers, creating patterns too deliberate to dismiss as random. Their motions become more synchronized each time you speak, as if learning your voice or adjusting their behavior to match your questions. A villager beside you steps forward and calls out in a thick northern accent, asking the lights whether they plan to return tomorrow. One light flickers 3 times. The villagers nod knowingly, as if this answer aligns perfectly with some unspoken schedule. Another villager calls a gentle greeting in a different dialect, and the lights respond with slow arcs across the valley floor. You realize this is not a spectacle they observe with fear. It is a conversation they have grown accustomed to. You try one final question. "Why do you appear here?" The lights freeze. Their glow tightens, narrowing to sharp points, and for a long moment they simply hang there, suspended. Then they move in unison, rising slowly until they form a perfect vertical line that stretches upward into the darkening sky. They hover like that, silent and rigid, before suddenly flaring into a brilliant burst that floods the valley with shimmering white. The brightness lasts only a second, but it leaves an afterimage etched across your vision, like an imprint of something unfathomable. When your sight clears, the lights are gone. The villagers remain calm, gathering lanterns and preparing to return home. One of them claps you on the shoulder with sympathetic amusement, as though to welcome you into a club whose initiation you did not realize you were undergoing. They tell you the lights have never spoken plainly and never will, but they listen and they answer in their own way. As you leave the ridge, you glance back once more. The valley looks perfectly ordinary again, but the hair on your arms still lifts with leftover electricity. You cannot shake the sense that the lights were not just reacting, they were studying. You find the activists gathered in a dim cellar beneath a tea shop that smells strongly of bergamot and mild rebellion. They greet you with cautious nods, the sort that suggests they have practiced appearing both welcoming and suspicious at the same time. A single lantern casts wavering shadows across their faces, making them look theatrical, though the mood in the room is anything but playful. Their leader, a wiry woman with sharp eyes and ink-stained fingers, gestures for you to sit. She explains that they are not revolutionaries, merely individuals concerned that certain discoveries remain locked behind palace walls where no one bothers to pretend secrecy is accidental. You expect overheated speculation or pamphlets full of exaggerated diagrams. Instead, you find notes on devices that should not exist, detailed sketches of engines powered by forces not yet named, descriptions of communication systems capable of reaching across continents without telegraph wires, reports of medical contraptions that heal tissue with focused beams of light. Each claim is too elaborate to dismiss easily, yet too unbelievable to accept without hesitation. The activists insist that these innovations are not inventions of the future. They are inventions of the present, hoarded by the crown as quietly as jewels. You ask how they can be certain. They exchange glances before producing a folder filled with copies of documents smuggled out through channels they refuse to discuss. The pages are stamped with insignias that look unmistakably official. One describes experiments involving gravity manipulation, written in such dry bureaucratic language that you almost miss the enormity of the concept. Another outlines a device capable of recording sound with a level of clarity that would shame the finest phonograph. The activists speak in urgent, hushed tones about trials conducted late at night beneath royal estates, lit only by the glow of machines no one has ever seen in public. A young man with trembling hands admits he once worked as an assistant to a palace engineer. He describes a chamber filled with glass tubes that pulsed with soft blue light, each one connected to a machine that hummed with unsettling harmony. He saw metal levitate above the device's surface, defying the weight that should have pulled it down. When he reported his observations, he was told to forget what he witnessed and reassigned to polishing doorknobs for the remainder of his employment. His voice breaks slightly as he recounts the memory, as though the machine's soft glow still lingers behind his eyes. The room grows tenser as the leader reveals their most troubling discovery. Rumors claim the monarchy is not merely hiding breakthroughs, but directing the empire according to them. Technologies capable of predicting population behavior, influencing public mood, even nudging economic trends through subtle environmental adjustments. You pause, thinking back to the coded weather reports and the strange experiments in factories and gardens. The pattern feels unnervingly coherent. You begin to understand why the activists seem more frightened than furious. They lead you to a second chamber, even smaller than the first. In the center sits a crate covered with burlap. When they pull back the fabric, you see a device no larger than a pocket watch. Its metal surface seems almost warm, and intricate gears inside rotate in silent, fluid motion. The activists explain it was recovered from a courier who vanished the following day. According to their research, the device can store spoken words and play them back perfectly. You stare, unable to look away from the tiny spinning gears. It resembles a miracle pretending to be modest. The leader lifts the device and whispers into it. A second later, her voice repeats from within the mechanism, flawless and eerie, as though the watch itself remembers her. The activists watch your reaction closely, hoping you will understand the implications. If this is merely one fragment of what has slipped through the monarchy's grasp, what else remains hidden? You ask whether they plan to reveal these technologies to the public. Their answer is a hesitant chorus of yes and no. They fear releasing inventions without understanding them could cause chaos. They fear even more what will happen if such discoveries remain controlled by a single family whose decisions shape the entire empire. The leader admits that they are torn between exposing the truth and protecting the world from knowledge it might not yet be ready to wield. As you leave the cellar, the activists fade back into the shadows, their quiet arguments resuming as if pulled along by invisible tension. You climb the stairs and emerge into the night, the city humming with ordinary life that suddenly feels artificial. Lanterns glow softly along the streets, but the memory of that pocket watch still echoes in your mind, whispering in a voice that is not its own. You walk through London with a growing sense that the monarchy is not merely guarding secrets, it is shaping the future in ways no one else is allowed to see. You enter the small photography studio, expecting the usual clutter of plates, chemicals, and portraits of families pretending they enjoy standing still for 10 minutes. Instead, you find an arrangement so precise it borders on ritual. Tripods stand in rigid rows. Lenses gleam under lamplight like polished eyes. The smell of developing fluid hangs in the air, sharp and medicinal, masking something subtler beneath it, something that prickles faintly at the back of your throat. The photographer greets you with a smile that barely moves his face, the smile of a man who has been instructed never to reveal what he knows. You came because of the accusations, whispered behind pub doors and muttered by people who look over their shoulders far too often. Rumors claim the secret police have begun experimenting with photography not to document crime scenes, but to read emotions. Supposedly, they believe that the faint distortions and light patterns around a person in a photograph reveal their truth, the way cracks in porcelain expose what lies beneath. You expected nonsense, the kind of paranoia that thrives in London's fog-soaked alleys. But when the photographer invites you to the back room, a quiet dread settles over your shoulders, heavier than your coat. The room is dim, illuminated by a single red lamp that casts every object in eerie glow. At first, you notice only the usual equipment, tins of chemicals, stacks of glass plates drying on racks. Then you see the wall. Dozens of photographs line it, arranged in meticulous grids. They are portraits, but not ordinary ones. Each face has been marked with inked annotations, tiny lines connecting specific shadows to handwritten notes in the margins. Words like guilt, hesitation, concealed affection, and practiced innocence appear beside the images with unsettling confidence. You step closer, studying a portrait of a man who looks perfectly calm. Yet the notes beside him insist otherwise. Uneven shadow around left eye, mouth tension, forehead strain, likely withholding information. You swallow hard, realizing each photograph has been dissected with surgical precision, as though the emotions of the subjects have been pinned open like specimens. The photographer watches you, hands folded behind his back. He explains that the secret police commissioned the prototypes as part of an initiative to refine interrogations. Traditional questioning, he says, relies too much on instinct. Photographic emotion mapping, however, promises accuracy. His tone is clinical, almost proud, but his eyes flick away too quickly whenever you look directly at him. He leads you to a contraption standing beneath a draped cloth. When he unveils it, the device resembles a camera only in the loosest sense. The lens is bulbous and dark, like the eye of a deep-sea creature. Copper wires coil around its frame, disappearing into a wooden box fitted with ticking gears. A plate holder sits at the back, but above it hangs a separate panel of glass etched with faint concentric circles. The photographer explains that the circles act as filters, each one designed to capture different emotional wavelengths. Before you can question what emotional wavelengths are, he demonstrates the device. He asks you to stand before the lens, which is absolutely the last thing you want. But the room feels too still to refuse. The camera emits a soft hum, a low vibrating sound that seems to resonate inside your ribs. The lens dilates slightly, as though focusing with living intention. A flicker of light flashes. You blink, disoriented. The hum fades. The photographer retrieves the glass plate with trembling hands. He immerses it in a tray of chemicals that bubble faintly. When he lifts it, you see your own face emerging, pale and grainy, but around your eyes, around your mouth, around the edges of your silhouette. Strange patterns bloom. Dark ripples, faint halos, small fractures of light and shadow that do not appear in ordinary photographs. The photographer studies the markings with professional detachment, murmuring an evaluation under his breath. Heightened vigilance, internal tension, recent exposure to disruptive information. You feel a chill slide down your spine. The machine reads you, or believes it does. You ask sharply whether the device is accurate. He hesitates. Sometimes, he says, sometimes too accurate. Then he shows you another plate, this one of a police inspector. The annotations beside it are more severe. Concealed hostility, violent impulse, risk factor high. You ask what became of him. The photographer lowers his voice and explains that the inspector was removed from duty the following week, though no official reason was ever provided. You stare at your own photograph again. The marks seem to shift under the lamplight, as though alive, as though analyzing you in return. You place the plate down quickly, careful not to crack it, terrified of seeing what other truths it might claim. As you leave the studio, you feel watched not by people, but by the idea that every flicker of expression could soon become a piece of evidence. The fog outside curls around your shoulders, like a reminder that London is full of eyes, some mechanical, some human, all far too interested in what you feel. And you realize this new technology does not merely capture faces, it captures fear. You begin noticing it long before anyone speaks of conspiracy. The public clocks seem slightly off, each one a little inconsistent with the next. At first it feels like the usual Victorian imprecision, the kind that results from overworked lamplighters and clock wardens who take their tea breaks seriously. But after several days of wandering the city, you realize the clocks disagree more boldly now, as though time itself has lost faith in its responsibilities. One tower rings the hour early. Another lags behind by a stretch too large to dismiss. The pattern gnaws at you quietly until someone finally whispers the theory aloud. It happens in a crowded coffee house where the air tastes faintly of burnt beans and ambition. A scholar in a wrinkled coat leans toward his companion and murmurs that timekeeping is being manipulated. Not carelessly, not through human error, but deliberately. You freeze mid-sip as he explains that the monarchy, or the government, or someone even less comforting, has begun adjusting the flow of minutes across the city. The claim sounds absurd, yet as soon as he says it, you feel a prickle of recognition. Something has been wrong for quite some time, and now you have a word for it. You decide to investigate by visiting the public clocks yourself. The first stands near a bustling market, its face bright beneath the afternoon sun. You watch the minute hand twitch forward, then hesitate, as if reconsidering. The second clock, perched atop a railway station, ticks confidently for several moments before pausing long enough for a pigeon to stare at it judgmentally. The third, mounted on the side of a church, skips an entire minute altogether, leaping ahead as though in a hurry to reach a future not yet ready. When you ask the wardens about these discrepancies, they grow nervous. One insists the mechanisms are sound and that you must have misread the dial. Another claims the clocks simply disagree sometimes, the way people do when discussing politics. A third offers you a lecture on humidity affecting gears, though his eyes flick toward the tower as if expecting it to deny him. You realize none of the wardens actually believes what they are saying. They repeat the excuses because someone told them to. Your search leads you to a clockmaker's workshop tucked between two narrow lanes. Inside, gears and springs lie arranged in tidy rows that contrast sharply with the tension in the room. The clockmaker himself looks exhausted, dark circles carved beneath his eyes. When you mention the missing minutes, he flinches so visibly that a handful of screws rattle off a nearby table. He closes the shutters before speaking, his voice low and strained. He says the clocks are not malfunctioning, they are obeying new directives. You press him, and he finally admits that officials arrived weeks ago with sealed instructions. They demanded adjustments to the inner mechanisms of every major public clock in the city. Not repairs, adjustments. They supplied specialized parts bearing markings the clockmaker had never seen, etched with symbols that seemed more mathematical than mechanical. He installed them under threat of losing his livelihood and, possibly, the freedom to complain about it. He opens a drawer and reveals one of the modified gears. It is beautifully crafted yet unnerving, with tiny grooves that catch the light in shifting patterns, almost as though they pulse. He places it in your hand, and the metal feels faintly warm, as if holding a memory of motion. He warns you that these gears do not simply alter timekeeping, they alter time itself. You try to laugh, to treat the claim as the fevered imagination of an overworked craftsman, but he gestures abruptly toward the shop's wall clock. The minute hand glides smoothly, then stutters, then leaps forward 2 entire notches with quiet determination. You check your own pocket watch, which disagrees entirely. The clockmaker nods grimly, as though the clock has just confirmed something he wished were untrue. He explains that the manipulated minutes tend to vanish at dawn and dusk, moments when the city shifts between states of light and dark. He suspects the missing minutes are not simply lost, but reallocated, compressed into unseen pockets of time that benefit someone, somewhere. He has begun keeping a private record of every anomaly, and he shows you the notebook. The entries describe periods when crowds seemed to freeze for a heartbeat, when conversations lost their rhythm, when mornings arrived slightly earlier than they should. You leave the workshop feeling unsteady, your thoughts tangled like the inner workings of a clock stripped of logic. As evening settles, you notice the gas lamps flickering in unison, each one steadying a moment after the last. The city's rhythm feels wrong again, shifting with a pulse too synchronized to be natural. You glance up at a nearby tower clock just in time to watch its minute hand jump. The movement is small, almost delicate, but unmistakably intentional. It hits you all at once. Time is not merely passing, it is being arranged. You slip into the library during a rainstorm, the kind that turns London's streets into reflective sheets of gray and encourages even the most disciplined scholars to abandon their reading rooms for warm hearths. The librarian gives you a polite nod, but there is a flicker of unease in her eyes when you ask for access to the restricted archives. She hesitates, weighing protocol against something else entirely, then unlocks a narrow door behind the main desk and gestures for you to follow. Her keyring jingles softly, a metallic whisper in the dim corridor. The restricted wing smells of dust, ink, and quiet disapproval. Shelves rise to the ceiling, packed with leather-bound volumes whose spines bear titles either cryptic or aggressively vague. The librarian explains that these texts are kept separate not because they are dangerous, but because they are misunderstood. Her tone suggests she does not believe her own explanation. She hands you a lantern and retreats, closing the door with a finality that sends a small shiver through you. You wander between towering shelves, lantern light pooling over books, stamped with symbols that resemble constellations, equations, and occasionally something that looks unsettlingly like a warning. When you pull the first volume free, its weight surprises you. The cover feels warm, though the aisle is cold. You open it to find diagrams of machines built from impossible angles, each annotated with terms Victorian science has not yet invented. Words like resonance field, etheric transfer, and harmonic ignition appear in flowing script. You frown, tracing the sketches. One illustration shows a device that pulls energy from the air without fuel, powering a series of gears that spin endlessly without diminishing. Another describes a beam of concentrated force strong enough to slice metal cleanly, drawn generations before anyone should conceive such possibilities. You close the book quickly, heart thudding. It feels less like reading a scientific proposal and more like glimpsing something humanity was not meant to understand so early. You move on, drawn by equal parts curiosity and dread. Another text contains accounts from explorers who claim to have encountered phenomena capable of illuminating entire caverns without flame. They describe plants glowing with internal radiance, stones humming with quiet power, and water generating sparks when stirred. Their language teeters between awe and terror. Most of their names are underlined in red ink, accompanied by brief notes in the margins. Missing, missing, deceased, missing. As you continue, the air grows warmer. You reach a shelf tucked into the far corner, where the lantern flame flickers violently, as if protesting. The books here look newer, their covers immaculate despite the dust around them. You pull one free and open it, expecting dense text. Instead, you find equations that spiral down the page like vines growing wild. They loop and twist, leaving little room for words. In the center of one page sits a diagram of a sphere encircled by rings of energy, each labeled with symbols that shimmer faintly in the lantern light. You run your finger over the ink. It tingles. A soft creak startles you. The librarian stands at the end of the aisle, watching with an expression that contains far too many emotions for comfort. She steps closer, lowering her voice as though the shelves themselves might be listening. She says the forbidden texts arrived gradually, from estates of scientists who worked alone and died abruptly. No one knows where they learned these theories. Many feared publishing them. Others insisted these discoveries were not inventions, but recoveries of knowledge older than modern civilization. You ask why the texts are hidden. She gives a thin, weary smile. Because people who study them tend to ask questions that draw unwanted attention. She gestures toward a locked cabinet beside the shelves, its metal latch worn with use. Inside are smaller notebooks filled with sketches, so detailed they appear almost like mechanical portraits. One drawing shows a handheld device emitting a field of light, bending objects around it. Another depicts a tower pulling lightning downward into a chamber where energy swirls like captured storm clouds. You feel the hairs on your arms rise. The librarian tells you that a few researchers attempted to build prototypes based on these designs. Their laboratories suffered unexplained fires, collapses, and in one case, a complete disappearance that left only scorch marks and a faint humming that lingered for hours. Authorities declared these incidents tragic accidents. The surviving researchers left London quietly, refusing to speak about their work again. You close the notebook carefully and return it to the cabinet. The librarian locks it quickly, as if relieved to seal the knowledge away. You glance back at the shelves, suddenly aware of a pressure in the air, a heaviness that suggests these books do not simply sit in silence. They wait. When you leave the restricted wing, the librarian locks the door behind you with an almost ceremonial care. Rain patters softly against the windows, a welcome sound after the stillness inside. As you step into the main hall, you realize that Victorian science is not merely advancing, it is remembering something. You meet the whistleblowers in a cramped pub that smells of damp wool, spilled ale, and secrets far too heavy for its low ceilings. They sit huddled in the darkest booth, a trio of men and women who look as though they have slept poorly for several weeks, maybe longer. One glances toward the door every few seconds. Another keeps both hands wrapped tightly around a cup he never drinks from, and a third has positioned herself so she can watch the entire room without moving her head. You introduce yourself carefully. They nod with the jittery relief of people who have been waiting for someone to believe them, or at least pretend to. You expected tales of corruption, perhaps petty misuse of funds, but instead, they begin describing the sewer system with an intensity that feels entirely disproportionate. They claim the tunnels beneath London are more than infrastructure. They are listening. You blink, wondering whether this is a metaphor. It is not. According to them, pipes built under the guise of drainage include narrow channels fitted with resonant cavities designed to capture echoes from above, footsteps, conversations, arguments whispered in confidence. All of it collected, funneled, and delivered to chambers positioned strategically beneath government buildings. You try to imagine engineers crouching in tunnels, tuning lengths of metal to eavesdrop on the city like an enormous stethoscope pressed to London's chest. The imagery is ridiculous, yet the whistleblowers speak with such precision that your laughter dissolves before it reaches your throat. They describe workers assigned to maintain the deeper sections of the system, men who perform repairs without fully understanding why the pipes vibrate with patterns that are not caused by water. One woman explains that certain junctions hum when people gather on specific streets, that the tunnels beneath busy markets ring like distant bells when enough voices overlap. She insists the vibrations travel along designated routes, guided to underground vaults where officials sit listening. You ask how they know this, and they exchange a series of looks before one of them retrieves a rolled blueprint from inside his coat. The parchment is stained, torn at the edges, and marked with symbols far more deliberate than any sewage plan should require. He lays it flat on the table between half-empty glasses. At first glance, it looks like a normal map of conduits and tunnels. Then he taps a section labeled with innocuous notations. When you lean in, you notice small circles drawn along the pipes, evenly spaced like beads on a string. Each circle contains measurements related not to flow rate, but to sound resonance. The woman points at another set of symbols. She explains that the circles function as acoustic amplifiers, capable of magnifying faint noises into intelligible recordings. When officials learned about this quirk of pipe design, they allegedly began expanding it. The whistleblowers claim that teams were hired under false titles to install additional resonant units. Some units are said to be sensitive enough to detect murmurs through floorboards. Some are rumored to capture vibrations from glass windows. They tell you that people have been dismissed from their jobs after private conversations led to suspiciously timed accusations. You study the blueprint again, feeling the unsettling shift between disbelief and understanding that has become so familiar in your investigation. A series of lines converge beneath a central chamber. It is marked only with a single word: archive. You do not like the implications of a place where voices funnel into silence. One whistleblower leans forward and says he once entered that chamber during a maintenance assignment. He describes a large circular room filled with pipes of varying widths, each one humming gently like a hive preparing for winter. The air vibrated with layers of sound, indecipherable yet unmistakably human. He tells you he fled after realizing the hums occasionally coalesced into words, as though the chamber were speaking in a voice stitched together from hundreds of overheard conversations. He has not been assigned to that section since. The pub door opens, and a draft cuts through the room. All three whistleblowers fall silent. You turn, seeing only a delivery boy wiping his boots on the mat. But the tension lingers. They urge you to keep their names to yourself, to never cite them directly. They claim officials track inquiries about the sewers with suspicious accuracy, and anyone asking too many questions ends up reassigned, relocated, or quietly unaccounted for. You leave the pub with the blueprint rolled tightly under your coat. The rain has eased, but the streets glisten with a sheen that reflects lamplight like liquid fire. As you walk, you hear the faint trickle of water beneath the pavement, the quiet gurgle of runoff snaking through pipes just below your feet. You pause beside a drain and listen. The water rushes steadily, but beneath it, you swear you hear something else. A faint rhythm, a whisper, a pattern. You step back, heart thudding, suddenly aware of how loudly the city speaks, and how carefully something beneath it listens. You first hear the rumors from an archivist who speaks in a tone usually reserved for scandalous confessions or especially strong cheese. He tells you that the churches of London hide coded messages in their stonework, and that these messages belong not to scripture but to something far older and far more deliberate. You expect the usual melodrama that accompanies architectural theories, the kind where someone misreads a decorative flourish and decides it is evidence of a secret society. Yet the archivist's hands shake slightly as he rolls out a parchment of sketches, and you sense that this will not be one of those harmless eccentricities London collects like souvenirs. You visit the first church on a gray morning when the city feels half assembled, wrapped in mist and muffled bells. At a glance, the building seems ordinary, a respectable blend of Gothic arches and spires intended to nudge parishioners toward humility. But once you begin examining the carvings, you notice something odd. The spacing between certain stone rosettes follows a precise sequence, one that looks suspiciously like a mathematical progression. You count the intervals again. The pattern remains. The archivist had hinted at this, but seeing it etched into centuries-old stone sends a ripple of unease through your chest. You step inside. Light filters through stained glass in narrow, colorful ribbons, illuminating floor tiles arranged with unsettling symmetry. You kneel to examine them closely and notice that the shapes repeat with a rhythm too intentional for decorative whim. A sexton approaches, broom in hand, and asks whether you are lost. You mention the patterns as casually as possible. His expression twitches, almost imperceptibly, before he mutters that the builders possessed an enthusiasm for geometry. Then he sweeps away before you can press further. You move from church to church, each one revealing more details that refuse to be dismissed as coincidence. Columns spaced according to numerical sequences associated with astronomical cycles, angles between arches that align perfectly with solstice positions. Even the placement of windows appears calculated to cast beams of light onto specific carvings at certain hours, as though the buildings themselves are sundials disguised in ecclesiastical clothing. You take notes in a small journal, filling pages with sketches and numbers. The deeper you look, the more you see. At street, Martin's, you find a row of carved faces positioned with intervals matching a prime number series. At street, Dunstan's, the stone tracery in the upper windows, mirrors the structure of harmonic ratios used in telegraph experiments. You stare at the patterns until your eyes blur, until the architecture feels less like construction and more like communication. One afternoon, you climb a narrow spiral staircase leading to a bell tower. The stairwell is dim, lit only by slivers of daylight leaking through arrow slits. Halfway up, you run your fingers along the wall and freeze. Etched into the stone are shallow grooves arranged in patterns you recognize from coded correspondences used by certain scientific societies. You trace the lines, half expecting them to rearrange themselves beneath your touch. The grooves continue upward, disappearing into the darkness above. At the top, you find more carvings behind the bells, hidden in a place no parishioner would ever see. Circles intersect with triangles, and triangles overlap with arcs that resemble orbital diagrams. You flip through your journal, comparing notes. The proportions match the star charts kept by astronomers who map constellations believed to shift deliberately. The geometry here is not religious. It is observational. A thought settles uneasily in your mind. Someone used the churches as repositories of information, not symbols meant to inspire faith, but instructions, coordinates, warnings, perhaps. You try to imagine the stonemasons tasked with carving these secrets into public buildings under the guise of piety. Were they sworn to silence, or did they not understand what they constructed? You picture an architect sketching these designs late at night, pausing whenever a floorboard creaked. As you descend the staircase, the sexton waits at the bottom, hands clasped, eyes far too knowing. He asks calmly whether you have found what you were looking for. You reply that you were only admiring the craftsmanship. He gives a small, strained smile. That is how it begins for everyone, he says, before turning away to extinguish a stray candle. You step outside into the open air, the bells booming above you, shaking dust from ancient rafters. The church looms behind you, solemn and silent, yet it feels less like a sanctuary now and more like a coded manuscript carved in stone. You look back one last time, tracing the roofline with your eyes. Every angle, every notch, every embellishment suddenly feels intentional. You cannot shake the realization growing inside you, heavy and certain. The architecture is not decoration. It is information, perfectly hidden in plain sight. You arrive in the district at the peak of the latest public panic, the kind London embraces with suspicious enthusiasm. This time the hysteria concerns wallpaper. Specifically, wallpaper dyes rumored to contain arsenic. You expect exaggerated headlines, shopkeepers wringing their hands, and physicians making dramatic pronouncements for the price of a pint. Instead, you find something quieter and far more unsettling. People lower their voices when discussing their walls. Families open windows even in the biting cold. Children avoid touching the decorative patterns meant to brighten their rooms. The fear feels too earnest to dismiss. You step into a wallpaper shop whose window displays blossoms in cheerful shades of green that now feel vaguely threatening. The owner greets you with a strained smile, insisting his products are perfectly safe provided customers do not lick them or sleep directly pressed against them, which is a comfort to absolutely no one. As he speaks, he keeps glancing at the door to the back room, as though expecting someone to burst through and contradict him. You browse the rolls of paper, noticing how many include that vibrant, almost glowing shade of green known to be fashionable. It is beautiful. It is also the color at the heart of every whispered warning. You ask the shopkeeper whether the rumors hold any truth. His face tightens, and he assures you that arsenic levels in the dyes are entirely negligible, practically imaginary, barely worth mentioning. Then he adds, almost as an afterthought, that he recently lost a delivery boy to a sudden illness. He claims it was unrelated, but his voice falters in a way that makes you doubt his conviction. When he excuses himself, you drift toward the back, where you hear hushed conversation. You find two workers measuring long sheets of patterned paper. Their hands are stained faintly green, and they wear cloths tied around their mouths. One complains of headaches that will not fade, while the other mutters about inspectors who confiscated entire shipments without explanation. When they notice you, they go silent, staring with the weary defiance of people who know too much and are tired of pretending otherwise. Your next visit takes you to a doctor rumored to treat victims of wallpaper exposure. His clinic smells of bitter tonics and unease. He reluctantly shows you his notes, each page filled with cases of persistent coughing, dizziness, and mysterious skin rashes. He speaks clinically, yet the tremor in his voice betrays him. He tells you that symptoms worsen in rooms decorated with the popular green dyes, especially those found in parlors where families gather and argue passionately. He adds that scraping samples from the walls often releases dust potent enough to make him nauseous. You ask whether the authorities are aware. He gives a hollow laugh and closes his notebook. They are aware, he says, and they have issued instructions to downplay the issue. Panic must be prevented. Public confidence must be maintained. Trade agreements must be protected. It seems there is nothing like a little poison to rally the economy. Still uncertain, you decide to gather first-hand evidence. You visit a townhouse belonging to a family who recently fell ill. The matron leads you to a parlor painted in a charming pattern of vines and flowers, all printed in that vivid green. The wallpaper gleams faintly in the lamplight, almost as though alive. The air feels heavy, tinged with a scent too metallic to be soothing. As you run your fingers lightly over the surface, a fine powder coats your skin. You hold your breath as you lift your hand, watching tiny particles shimmer in the dim light. The matron warns you not to touch your face. She speaks from experience. When you step outside, your lungs feel lighter, as though you have escaped something invisible pressing against your ribs. You hurry to a chemist who conducts tests using a small flame that turns a telltale color at the presence of arsenic. When he touches the wallpaper sample to the test, the flame flares in unmistakable confirmation. He watches the reaction with a grim resignation, explaining that manufacturers have known for years, yet continue producing the dyes. They argue that the danger only emerges under certain conditions no one seems willing to define. You ask why no one has acted decisively. The chemist sighs and says that the public prefers beauty to safety, that officials prefer denial to scandal, and that dye producers prefer profit to everything. Then he quietly pockets the sample, burning it in a metal dish until nothing remains but ash. As you walk home, you see homes glowing warmly with lamplight behind delicate curtains. You imagine the walls inside, vibrant and deadly, shedding toxic dust with every shift of air. You think of the shopkeeper's trembling voice, the doctor's hesitant words, the chemist's resigned flame, and you realize the panic was never exaggerated. It was the only reasonable response to a truth no one wanted to admit. The estate sits at the far end of a long gravel road flanked by trees that seem to lean in conspiratorially, their branches arching overhead like a warning. The place looks abandoned from a distance, windows dark, chimneys cold, but as you approach, a faint vibration thrums beneath the earth. It hums up through your boots in a steady pulse, subtle enough to ignore if you were not listening for it. You have followed rumors that scientists here are experimenting with sound, not music or acoustics, but frequencies so precise they slip beneath ordinary hearing and into the realm of uncanny possibility. The front door stands slightly ajar. You push it open and step into a hallway layered in dust, except for a thin path of footprints leading inward. The air feels charged, as though someone has stretched a violin string through the entire house and left it quivering. You follow the footprints to a drawing room where heavy drapes have been pulled tight. Papers litter the floor, covered in sketches of waveforms that loop and spiral beyond any recognizable pattern. Handwritten notes spill into the margins, mixing mathematical equations with frantic observations. You pick up a page and read the first line. Vibrations extend beyond expected thresholds. Unclear origin. Unclear consequence. A low tone rumbles through the floorboards. You freeze, unsure whether the sound is real or imagined. The vibration intensifies for a moment, then fades, leaving behind a sinking stillness. Curiosity outweighs caution, and you venture deeper into the estate. You find a staircase leading down to a basement illuminated by dim lanterns that flicker with unnerving rhythm. As you descend, the temperature shifts, growing warmer in pockets and cooler in others, as if the air is moving to a pattern known only to the house. The basement is enormous, far larger than the estate suggests from above. At its center stands a circular machine constructed of metal tubes and resonant plates. Wires stretch outward in delicate arcs, connecting to smaller devices arranged like attendants around a throne. A phonograph sits on a table nearby, its horn pointed toward the machine's core. You press a hand to the metal, expecting cold, but instead feel a faint heat pulsing steadily beneath your palm. A figure emerges from behind the machine, coat dusted with powder and hair in complete disarray. The scientist looks at you with a mixture of relief and exhaustion, as though visitors are rare but not unwelcome. He explains that his work involves frequencies beyond the human range, tones capable of affecting matter itself. He speaks quickly, hands trembling with the energy of someone who has not slept properly in weeks. He gestures toward a glass cylinder perched on a nearby stand, inside which a small piece of metal floats, suspended in midair. No magnets, no wires, just sound holding it aloft. You step closer, watching the metal tremble slightly despite the stillness of the room. The scientist taps a tuning fork against the table. The tone is barely audible, yet the floating metal rises higher, spinning lazily in the air. He taps a different fork, this one producing a pitch you feel more than hear. The metal descends, settling gently against the bottom of the cylinder. You stare, unsure whether to marvel or run. The scientist admits he does not fully understand why these frequencies produce such effects. He claims the tones resonate with matter in ways no previous theory accounts for. He suspects that certain frequencies might influence water, metal, even thought if directed properly. His notes mention strange side effects: lamps flickering without fuel, floorboards bending as though reluctant to support weight, and moments when he felt observed by something not physically present. As he speaks, a deep frequency rolls through the basement, so low it rattles your teeth. The machine awakens, plates vibrating, wires trembling like living nerves. The metal cylinder glows faintly. You step back instinctively, watching as dust lifts from the floor in swirling currents. The air feels distorted, thickened at the edges, as if sound is shaping it into something almost tangible. The scientist hurries to shut off the device, spinning dials and pulling levers with frantic expertise. Slowly, the vibration fades, the air settles, and gravity reasserts its authority. He wipes sweat from his brow, muttering that the machine has begun responding to frequencies he did not program. "It is learning," he says, though whether that is possibility or threat he refuses to answer. You climb the stairs with your pulse still fluttering in your throat. The house feels different now, each creak and whisper of wind carrying potential meaning. Outside, the trees stand unmoving, yet the air holds a faint hum that prickles against your skin. You walk away from the estate, feeling as though the sound has followed you, lingering behind your ears like a question that will not stop asking itself, and you wonder whether the machine was merely responding or whether it was calling out. You hear the story first at a dinner party where the guests are far more interested in gossip than the roast. A baronet leans toward you with the delighted malice of someone who lives for inconvenience. He tells you that several aristocrats presumed dead are, in fact, very much alive, tucked away in country estates or foreign retreats, while their families stage tasteful mourning rituals. You laugh politely until he adds that their deaths were faked for scientific reasons, which is not a sentence you expect from a man wearing silk gloves indoors. He insists the truth lies in letters recently uncovered, letters that were never meant to see daylight. Curiosity pulls you to an old townhouse owned by a widow whose calm demeanor suggests she has endured more than her share of aristocratic nonsense. She leads you to an attic furnished with the soft dust of a century and a trunk secured by a clasp that looks older than most family lineages. Inside, you find stacks of correspondence tied with faded ribbon. The handwriting varies from extravagant flourishes to the scratchy scrawl of minds racing too quickly for their own quills. You unfold the first letter and feel the air tighten around you. The writer, reported to have died of a mysterious fever, describes conducting experiments that pushed beyond the acceptable boundaries of Victorian science. He mentions rival researchers attempting to sabotage his work, slipping false formulas into his notes and sending anonymous warnings that reek of threat. His solution was elegant in a deranged sort of way: fake his own death, vanish into obscurity, and continue his experiments under an assumed identity. You turn the page, half expecting to find apologies to his family. Instead, he asks his confidant to deliver news of his demise with appropriate sadness, but not too much, as excessive grief might invite suspicion. Another letter reveals a woman of nobility whose staged death shocked polite society for months. Officially, she succumbed to a sudden illness. Unofficially, she escaped through a network of tunnels beneath her estate, accompanied only by a handful of trusted assistants and a crate of peculiar instruments. Her writing is sharp, infused with irritation toward her scientific rival, whom she calls a pompous man with the intellect of boiled mutton. She believed he planned to steal her research on botanical compounds capable of accelerating growth in ways that defied conventional understanding. Rather than confront him publicly, she orchestrated her exit with the precision of a military campaign. You find yet another letter, penned by a duke who supposedly drowned during an expedition. His tone is calm, almost cheerful, as he explains he never touched the water. Instead, he boarded a separate vessel under a false name, ensuring the world believed him a tragic warning about the sea while he relocated to a remote laboratory. He writes of breakthroughs that could not be shared openly, theories that would bring ridicule or worse. He mentions visits from other not-so-deceased colleagues, and describes gatherings where they exchange discoveries with the casual comfort of people who no longer need to maintain reputations. Piece by piece, a pattern emerges. These aristocrats were not merely faking deaths for dramatic flair. They were embroiled in a quiet scientific war, one waged with patents, stolen ideas, and rumors that tarnished reputations long before bodies were declared lifeless. Rivalries intensified until the only logical solution, at least in their minds, was for some to vanish entirely. Their letters reveal jealousy, ambition, and flashes of brilliance that feel both thrilling and unbalanced. You sense that these minds were not meant to be restrained by the expectations of polite salons. The widow watches you read with a calm expression, though her fingers twist slightly in her lap. She tells you she discovered the letters only after her husband passed away, and she believes he had been helping coordinate these disappearances. She claims he received coded messages instructing him to deliver parcels, reroute correspondence, and intercept nosy investigators. When you ask why he agreed, she says he believed in their work, in their vision of a future shaped by discovery rather than scandal. You sit back on the dusty floorboards, letters scattered around you like pieces of a puzzle you are hesitant to complete. The stories stretch beyond eccentricity into something far stranger, a hidden network of brilliant individuals who chose shadows over scrutiny. They traded their identities for freedom, their titles for secrecy, their funerals for laboratories humming with forbidden experiments. As you leave the attic, the widow closes the trunk with a soft click that feels almost ceremonial. You step out into the crisp air, aware that somewhere in the countryside or across distant oceans, people declared dead are conducting work that might alter the world while their gravestones quietly gather moss. And you cannot decide whether this revelation is reassuring, horrifying, or both. You enter the newspaper office expecting bustle and ink-stained chaos, the usual chorus of shouting editors and clattering presses. Instead, you find an eerie orderliness. Desks sit arranged with almost mathematical symmetry, stacks of papers aligned with unnatural precision, and journalists work in silence, broken only by the scratch of quills gliding across columns destined to shape public opinion. The editor-in-chief looks up briefly, offers a tight smile, and returns to marking red circles on a page with the deliberation of a surgeon choosing where to cut. Something feels off, as though the air itself has been edited. You came because whispers ripple through London like a draft through old floorboards. Accusations claim the newspapers coordinate scandals, timing them with uncanny precision to steer elections, sink careers, or mysteriously resurrect public sympathies. It sounds like conspiracy bred from political exhaustion, yet the more you heard, the more the details aligned. Too many stories breaking on the same day. Too many rivals receiving the same ruinous headline. Too many anonymous sources speaking in identical phrasing. A junior reporter takes pity on your confusion and motions for you to follow him to the back of the building. He leads you down a narrow staircase into an archive room that smells of dust and ink and secrets pressed flat for storage. Shelves tower above you, packed with bundles of old newspapers tied with twine. He hands you a stack dated several years back and tells you to compare the dates of the scandals with parliamentary voting schedules. You flip through the papers and feel a chill. A minister exposed for financial misconduct the morning of a crucial budget vote, a scandal involving foreign correspondents erupting precisely one day before a contested trade debate. A smear against an independent candidate printed 2 hours before polls opened, just late enough to evade rebuttal. The pattern sharpens with each page, as though the ink itself is whispering truths no one intended you to notice. The reporter watches your expression and nods grimly. He confesses that articles do not always originate from the newsrooms. Some arrive sealed in envelopes delivered by couriers whose names are never given. Editors receive them with a blend of dread and resignation, reading them with the air of men forced to swallow medicine too bitter to refuse. He says that whenever one of these envelopes arrives, the press floor goes quiet. Within hours, a new scandal appears in print, its timing too perfect to be coincidence. You examine the envelopes he shows you from a locked drawer. They are unmarked except for a small printed symbol, a geometric flourish that resembles an abstract key. Inside are meticulously typed sheets containing exact phrases, precise quotes, and accusations backed by just enough evidence to appear credible. They read less like news and more like scripts meant to be performed on a national stage. In a corner of the archive, you discover a ledger that should not exist. Its pages list election dates beside headlines published that same week. Beside certain entries, brief notes appear in a clipped, mechanical hand. Confirmed, timely, redirected focus, manufactured urgency. The ledger tracks public sentiment with cold, statistical precision, as though the editors are less interested in informing the populace than steering it gently toward predetermined conclusions. The reporter explains that a handful of powerful figures meet in private parlors to decide which scandals will erupt and when. They gather information for months, waiting until it can be deployed with surgical effect. If a rival gains momentum, they release something sharp enough to cut. If an ally falters, they supply a fresh outrage to distract the public. They weaponize attention. They manipulate outrage like a conductor guiding a symphony. You ask whether the journalists themselves know. He shakes his head. Most believe they are chasing stories independently, unaware their leads were planted like breadcrumbs. They think they uncover truth when in reality they follow trails laid by individuals whose names never appear in print. You turn back to the ledger, flipping to the most recent entries. One page contains a blank space reserved for a scandal not yet deployed. Next to it sits a note in that same mechanical handwriting. Activation pending approval. You feel a weight in your chest. Somewhere, a decision has been made. Someone's reputation is already doomed, the ink drying before the public even knows whom to judge. You return upstairs, walking through the silent newsroom with new eyes. The journalists continue their work, unaware or unwilling to confront the mechanisms shaping their output. The editor glances at you once more, his expression revealing nothing yet somehow confirming everything. Outside, the street buzzes with evening chatter, unaware that tomorrow's outrage is already printed, folded, and ready to slide into the world like a match dropped into dry grass. And you realize the scandals do not merely report public life, they design it. You first hear about the photographs from a collector who speaks with the hushed reverence usually reserved for rare artifacts or scandalous diaries. He tells you there are images circulating in private circles that should not exist. Photographs capturing political dealings decades before the technology should have been refined enough to capture anything more than a blurry silhouette. You expect exaggeration, the kind that accompanies antique trading, but he shows you a glimpse of one image before quickly tucking it away, and the clarity freezes you in place. A prominent statesman stands in a dimly lit parlor, speaking to a man whose face is half hidden. Yet the detail is unmistakable. You recognize both. They should not be in the same room. History insists they were not. Curiosity drives you to a dim warehouse near the river, where the collector says more evidence waits in crates forgotten by time or deliberately ignored. The structure is quiet, filled with the smell of damp wood and salt carried in on the fog. You pry open the first crate and find boxes labeled with innocuous symbols. Inside are stacks of photograph plates wrapped in cloth. You hold one up to the lantern. The image reveals a clandestine meeting at a private dock, The face is sharp enough to identify men who would later deny ever speaking to each other. You study the coat styles, the lantern glow, the angle of the shot. Someone captured this from above, perhaps from a rooftop or balcony, with a clarity that feels impossibly modern. As you sift through the plates, you notice a progression. The earliest ones are grainy, but still too detailed for their era. Later plates show lighting techniques no known camera of the time could achieve. Shadows fall in ways suggesting controlled exposure. Subjects appear frozen mid-gesture with sharp precision, a feat Victorian cameras simply cannot perform without extensive posing. Yet no one stands still long enough for that. The images feel candid, almost intrusive, as though the photographer had mastered a technique decades ahead of the rest of the world. You find notes tucked between some of the plates. They describe lens experiments involving chemically treated glass, capable of capturing light at faster intervals. Familiar terms appear, but others read like fragments of a future handbook: acceleration compounds, stabilized crystal shutters, rapid impression emulsions. These are not diagrams of hypothetical devices. They are instructions, written with confidence, as if the photographer built and refined these tools in secret. Further inside the warehouse, you uncover a trunk filled with smaller devices wrapped in oilcloth. When you disentangle the cloth, you reveal a camera unlike any Victorian model you have seen. It is compact, with a curved metal housing and a shutter that clicks softly when you touch it. You turn it over in your hands, marveling at how comfortable it feels, how impossibly advanced it appears. A small compartment holds thin glass plates pre-treated with chemicals, each one designed for rapid exposure. Someone engineered a handheld machine decades before the world would conceive such possibilities. A ledger lies at the bottom of the trunk. You flip through its pages, discovering lists of political figures followed by dates and addresses. Each entry corresponds to a photograph you have already seen. Many contain additional notes: leverage secured, confirmation obtained, future alliances predicted. You realize these images were not taken for posterity. They were tools, weapons, currency in a hidden economy of influence. You pause at an especially unsettling page. It lists the date of a well-known scandal that altered the course of an entire election. Beneath it sits a photograph showing the key figure meeting privately with a supposed adversary. The scandal should have been spontaneous. Instead, the photograph suggests orchestration. Someone waited for the perfect moment to release damning information, shaping public opinion with cold precision. A creak echoes through the warehouse, pulling you back to the present. You extinguish your lantern instinctively, aware that the building suddenly feels less empty. Through the slats of the crate, you see a figure lingering near the entrance. They stay only long enough to confirm the door is still shut before disappearing into the fog. You cannot tell whether they belong to the past or the present, whether they are a remnant of the operation or a guardian ensuring its secrets remain buried. You rewrap the camera and close the crates gently, though your hands tremble. Outside, the city churns with ordinary life, unaware that its past may have been shaped by a lens no one knew existed. You walk quickly, feeling the night press around you, every shadow reminding you of the photographs etched with impossible detail. And you realize the political world was documented long before it knew it was being watched. The closer you get to the outskirts of London, the thicker the air becomes, as though the fog has taken offense at your lungs and decided to occupy every available inch of space. Factories loom in the distance, their chimneys exhaling plumes that merge with the natural mist until you cannot tell where weather ends and industry begins. Workers move through the haze with the weary confidence of people who have memorized every pothole and railing by tactile familiarity alone. You came because whispers insist that certain factories are not merely polluting by accident. They are generating harmful fog intentionally, each plume shaped with purpose rather than carelessness. You begin with the factory most often accused, a towering brick structure whose windows glow faintly in the dim afternoon. Inside, the air smells of coal, chemicals, and something sharper you cannot identify. Machinery clatters rhythmically, shuddering with mechanical pride. A foreman approaches you with a smile too rehearsed to trust. He speaks about productivity, improved output, and innovations that benefit society. His words slip around the subject of emissions with the agility of a politician dodging responsibility. He dismisses rumors of deliberate fog-making as nonsense invented by competitors. His tone is steady, yet his hands tremble slightly when you ask to see the records. You wander the factory floor, noticing vents shaped oddly, as though designed not to release steam but to direct it. Workers cough into handkerchiefs stained with gray that no amount of washing will remove. A woman near a large vat stirs with mechanical precision, eyes watering as she tells you quietly that they increase production at dusk. She mentions something about quotas, patterns, and supervisors who count not only output but atmospheric density. Then she turns away quickly when the foreman glances in her direction. In a storage room, you discover crates filled with canisters, labeled using abbreviations that do not match any standard chemical notation you know. You pry open one and find a powder with a dull sheen, faintly sweet-smelling, the aroma clinging to your skin even after you shut the crate. A worker catches sight of you and quietly warns that the powder is not meant for handling without protective gear. When you ask what it does, he hesitates before whispering that it interacts with moisture in the air. His expression suggests he has said too much. The ledgers are hidden in an office above the floor, accessible only after the foreman leaves briefly to reprimand a worker. You slip inside, close the door, and sift through the papers strewn across a desk worn smooth by anxious hands. Most pages detail mundane expenses, wages, and supply orders. Then you find a section marked only with a small symbol resembling a swirling cloud. The entries beneath it are written in a different hand, the ink darker, the script meticulous. Each line documents fog output levels in exact measurements, alongside notations referencing neighborhoods, street conditions, and public responses. The ledger tracks how fog density affects movement, how certain districts slow to a crawl when visibility drops, how people avoid specific routes during high concentration nights. You turn the page and find more unsettling details. Notes on how thicker fog increases the likelihood of crowds dispersing, observations about reduced foot traffic outside political offices, comments on merchants losing customers during heavy smog events. Every notation is followed by the same phrase, impact acceptable. Another section describes contracts with unnamed clients requesting evening saturation events and strategic reduction of visibility in targeted districts. Payment amounts rise on days when political meetings are scheduled or when influential figures travel through the city. You stare at the ink, cold creeping through your veins. The motive is not sabotage for science, nor experimentation, nor negligence. It is control. Fog as a tool for shaping public behavior, masking movements, hindering gatherings, and crafting the city's mood like an artist dimming a lantern to change the scene. You hear footsteps in the hall. You close the ledger and slip it beneath your coat just as the foreman reappears. His smile seems thinner now, stretched too tight. He asks whether you found everything you needed. You respond with practiced neutrality, though your pulse drums against your ribs. He escorts you out with a gentleness that feels more like warning than courtesy. Outside, the fog has thickened. It curls around your ankles, wraps the street in a muffled hush, dulls the world into an indistinct blur. People hurry past you, heads down, unaware that this haze is not natural whim but orchestrated outcome. You breathe shallowly, tasting the faint sweetness of the powder lingering in the air. You walk away from the factory, ledgers pressing against your side like a heartbeat. You understand now. The fog is not merely a byproduct of progress. It is policy. You find the first clue wedged inside a notebook left behind at a midnight lecture about celestial navigation. It falls to the floor with a soft flutter, a slip of paper covered in neat constellations and strange markings that look less like astronomical notes and more like instructions disguised in starlight. You study the symbols, tracing lines between familiar clusters, until you notice that several stars have been circled in a pattern far too deliberate to ignore. When you turn the page over, you find an address written in careful ink. The handwriting suggests urgency. The choice of medium suggests secrecy. You decide to follow it because curiosity has been steering most of your evenings lately, and ignoring cosmically coded invitations now feels almost rude. The address leads to a greenhouse on the outskirts of the city, its glass panes fogged from within despite the cold evening. When you slip inside, warm air envelops you, heavy with the scent of soil and the faint hum of machinery hiding beneath ferns. A group of people stands gathered around a long table, their faces half lit by lanterns shielded with cloth to dim their glow. They glance at you, wary yet unsurprised, as though they expected a stranger but were not entirely sure which one. An older inventor with ink smudged on his collar greets you quietly. He taps the star chart in your hand, nodding with approval, and tells you that only those who decipher the code are welcome. You learn quickly that these individuals do not meet to exchange pleasantries. They share knowledge considered too dangerous, too unorthodox, or too advanced for public scrutiny. One reveals a device designed to store heat within metal, releasing it only when triggered by specific vibrations. Another unfurls blueprints of a machine that can distort sound so completely it leaves a room feeling hollow, as though silence itself has been stretched thin. They speak with the fervor of artists unveiling their masterpieces, each invention built in defiance of laws both scientific and political. The coded star charts serve as invitations, maps pointing to rotating meeting sites chosen to avoid detection. Each chart shifts its meaning depending on season and sky position, requiring constant vigilance to interpret correctly. You watch them lay several charts across the table, aligning certain constellations with city districts, overlaying symbols that act as keys. When the pieces fall into place, the map reveals a hidden location for their next gathering, a place tucked away between familiar streets, yet invisible to anyone who has not studied the sky with obsessive devotion. They explain that they began using coded star charts after one of their earliest meetings was raided by officials who claimed to be investigating patent theft. The group suspects the raid was less about theft and more about suppressing breakthroughs that threatened established industries. Since then, the stars have served as their guardians, their guideposts, their unspoken language. A young woman with burns across her fingers shows you an object that resembles a pocket watch, though its face is blank except for a faintly glowing ring pulsing at irregular intervals. She tells you it responds to magnetic fluctuations, allowing its wearer to detect invisible disturbances in the environment. She discovered the design in an old text, refined it, and now tests prototypes during each meeting. Others lean forward, offering suggestions, debating improvements, scribbling notes that would make any respectable academic faint. One man, tall enough to bump the low-hanging lanterns, reveals sketches of an energy conduit capable of transferring power through metal rods buried beneath streets. He theorizes a future city lit entirely without need for fuel. Another member questions him sharply, pointing out risks of uncontrolled surges. Their argument grows animated, but underneath the tension lies unmistakable respect. They challenge each other not out of competition, but out of shared purpose. You listen, transfixed. The ideas feel impossibly advanced, as though you have stepped into an alternate timeline where innovation races ahead without waiting for public approval. And yet, every invention carries shadows with it. The pocket watch device interferes with compasses. The heat-storing metal glows faintly even when cool. The sound-distorting machine once caused a volunteer to lose his sense of balance for days. The group acknowledges these dangers openly, insisting they innovate not recklessly but realistically, fully aware that progress often walks hand in hand with consequence. As the meeting concludes, they extinguish the lanterns one by one, plunging the greenhouse into dim starlight leaking through the glass roof. The coded charts are folded and tucked away. Each inventor departs through different exits, scattering across the city like constellations breaking into separate stars. Before you leave, the older inventor presses a new chart into your hand. He tells you the sky will reveal the next meeting place soon, provided you know how to listen. Outside, the night feels sharper, the stars brighter, as if the heavens themselves are complicit in this quiet rebellion. You walk back toward London, with the folded chart warming in your pocket, wondering how many discoveries have been born in shadows, how many breakthroughs were hidden in plain sight, mapped not in books or laboratories, but written across the sky itself. You look up, tracing the constellations with new understanding. The stars are not merely distant lights, they are invitations. You do not intend to connect anything at first, You simply walk through London carrying fragments of strange encounters like loose threads trailing behind you, each one tugging at your thoughts. A séance parlor where officials attend ghost sessions. Railway tunnels hiding movement beneath the trains. Telegraph lines humming with signals too fast for mortal operators. Factories producing fog with suspicious regularity. Libraries guarding impossible devices. Plants that pulse with awareness. Lights in the northern valleys that bend to human voices. You try to file them separately, as any reasonable person would, but they refuse to stay apart. They drift toward one another with magnetic insistence, aligning themselves in ways you cannot unsee once the pattern emerges. It begins subtly. You notice that the weather-coded stock predictions discussed by aristocrats resemble the same kind of symbolic structuring found carved into church architecture. Patterns disguised as innocence. Signals dressed as decoration. Both systems rely on a public display, masking private instruction. Then you recall the star charts used by inventors to schedule forbidden meetings. Charts built on geometric ratios that mirror the architectural sequences hidden in stained glass windows. You realize people separated by decades and disciplines have been speaking a shared language without acknowledging it. A language of lines and intervals and coded alignments. You sit down with your notes spread before you, pages upon pages, cluttered with sketches, overheard confessions, maps of railway tunnels, diagrams of sound machines, fragments of laboratory logs, and copies of photographs that should not exist. The mess looks chaotic at first, a collection of Victorian absurdities connected only by their audacity. But when you align them side by side, the shapes begin to merge. Secrets about dream monitoring nestle neatly beside the covert photography operations. Experiments with sound frequencies echo the anomalies in factories where workers describe vibrations that feel intentional. Even the harmful fog begins to seem less like manipulation alone and more like calibration, as though the city itself must maintain certain atmospheric conditions for reasons no one fully understands. You begin drawing lines between the conspiracies, connecting events and discoveries you once believed were isolated. The lines intersect again and again, until your notes resemble the inner workings of a machine. You pause, swallowing the realization that creeps up your spine. The connections are not symbolic. They are functional. Signals, fog, sound, observation, altered timekeeping, coded information, impossible devices, accelerated evolution, hidden knowledge, manipulated perception. Each element performs a task, and together they form a system so vast you can only see fragments of its purpose. A hidden machine, built across decades by hands that never publicly coordinated, yet somehow, inexplicably, worked in rhythm. When you consider the seances again, they no longer seem like isolated oddities. If officials attended them not for superstition but for intelligence extracted from phenomena they barely understood, then those sessions become calibration points. If factories produce fog not merely to control movement but to diffuse substances under study by government chemists, the fog becomes another component. If telegraph lines carry signals no human operator can send, those lines become conduits. If clocks skip minutes at precise intervals, perhaps something requires the city to breathe in uneven time, expanding and contracting rhythmically like a lung. You close your eyes and see London not as streets and buildings, but as interlocking parts. Tunnels beneath railway tracks form arteries. Telegraph lines trace nerves. Factories hum with mechanical heartbeat. Churches encode the mathematical blueprint of the system. Hidden laboratories refine sensory organs. The fog wraps everything like insulation. Even the stars, or at least the charts derived from them, guide adjustments to the machine's synchronization. You exhale slowly. The city is not supposed to feel alive. Yet London, viewed through the conspiracies you have encountered, feels disturbingly sentient, as though generations of inventors, aristocrats, scientists, activists, dream manipulators, and secret committees have unknowingly assembled a structure neither wholly mechanical nor entirely human. But one question remains. If these gears have been turning quietly across the century, who set the machine in motion, and for what purpose? Your lantern flickers. The room seems to tilt, subtly, like something deep beneath the floor has shifted. You glance toward the window and see the fog rolling in with impeccable timing, as if responding to your revelations. A telegraph wire hums outside. Somewhere in the distance, a clock tolls the hour, though the minute hand insists it is too soon. The pieces click together with dreadful clarity. This machine is not hidden because it is fragile. It is hidden because it is already functioning. You walk through the city with the uneasy clarity of someone who has finally stopped searching for explanations and begun accepting them. The theories you once dismissed as overactive imagination now cling to every surface of London, layered into the fog, humming through the telegraph wires, vibrating in the cobblestones beneath your feet. You feel as though the whole city has been waiting for you to catch up, and now that you have, it watches you with the patient triumph of a teacher whose slowest pupil has finally understood the lesson. The whispers of haunted seances, impossible star alignments, intelligent plants, and dream-reading machines no longer feel disconnected or absurd. They feel inevitable. You think back to the officials who sat in darkened rooms hoping to bargain with spirits. You remember laboratories where light behaved incorrectly and factories that produced fog with suspicious intention. You replay quiet confessions from librarians guarding books full of energy that should not exist, inventors sharing designs hidden beneath coded star charts, and whistleblowers insisting the sewers themselves were listening. You recall each moment of disbelief you carried like armor, and the way each discovery cracked it until nothing remained but the truth that had been waiting underneath. As you walk, London seems to reveal its true shape. The fog curls around you with unmistakable purpose, almost guiding your steps. Telegraph poles hum with faint frequencies you now know are far more than communication. Clocks tick unevenly, bending moments into shapes you once blamed on faulty gears. Buildings align with mathematical precision no architect would admit to. Even the distant glow of gas lamps feels coordinated, flickering in rhythm as if responding to signals only the city understands. You pause at a bridge overlooking the Thames. The river flows beneath you with slow confidence, reflecting lights that shimmer like coded messages drifting across the surface. You think of the aristocrats who faked their deaths to protect rivalries, experiments, and discoveries that would have sounded delusional if not for the proof now scattered across your notes. You think of the animals bred for intelligence in hidden laboratories, the factories manipulating public movement with concentrated fog, and the newspapers staging scandals like clockwork crafted from ink and influence. A soft tremor ripples through the air. You feel it in your ribs, a gentle reminder that the machine beneath the city continues its steady work. You wonder how many generations contributed to this hidden mechanism without ever understanding the part they played. Some acted out of ambition, others fear, others curiosity. Together, they assembled something sprawling and intricate, a system so large no single mind could comprehend it while standing within it. And yet, the Victorians did not descend into hysteria as history suggested. They were not fragile minds overwhelmed by novelty or superstition. They were observers pressed against the edge of truth, glimpsing a structure that eluded language and demanded metaphors that future scholars would mock. Their so-called paranoia was simply recognition. Their conspiracies were warnings. Their strange behaviors were the instincts of people living inside a body that had begun to awaken. You look across the river at buildings rising like gears from the fog. Every window resembles an eye. Every beam of lamplight resembles a signal. Every echo feels purposeful. You cannot tell whether this realization frightens you or comforts you. After all, the machine has been operating long before you arrived, humming steadily beneath centuries of denial. And it will continue long after you are gone. You inhale the cold night air, feeling London settle around you like a living thing. The Victorians were not paranoid at all. You were simply late to the truth.